100 years ago, the forces of Qi were resurrected. Fierce evil spirits have risen, threatening the kingdom of people. But fortunately, extraordinary abilities awoke in people. The first to awaken desperately fought evil. So they founded 4 great outposts to protect the people together. Yushen lived in Moge, a crime-ridden city, from his early childhood. There were almost always fights there, very often with fatal results. Somehow he had an incredible talent. 9 patterns. 9 was incredible. Almost no one has ever had such a quantity. Sometimes the young man's behavior was very unusual. He could have picked up the phone and called the police. Inform the police that a sexual assault will occur today at 8 p.m. at Sophie's Hotel, room 302. And the fact that the buyer of sex services is his father. He also had extraordinary agility. If he met hooligans on the street, then they could not succeed in his dexterity. The bully tried to attack the guy with a stick. At the same time, Yushen deftly recovered from the blow. He could easily neutralize a criminal by slashing his hand with a sharp object. The attacker immediately dropped his stick to the floor. And he began to scream unbearably. His hand was cut. He no longer had the desire to attack anyone. Yushen always carried items with him that would help him deal with the hooligans attacking him. He also easily attracted attention. His teacher was confident that the young man would be able to surprise him. The teacher pointed his finger out the window where Yushen was passing at that moment and told someone that this guy should be of interest. It is not as simple as it seems at first glance. A young man who was born in a criminal city, hope in the struggle of people, who will he grow up to be? It was already getting dark outside. There was a light shining in the house where Yushen lived. There was a note on his father's desk that listed the name of the hotel as well as room number 302. Yusen Shui, the young man's father, was going somewhere. He preened himself in front of the mirror. He was dressed in a fresh suit. He was combing his hair. It was clear that he was trying to look his best. One could assume that he was going on a date with some beauty. He was daydreaming about something and said that at 40, a man is like wine. The final touch to be irresistible is the application of perfume. The father pressed the perfume spray several times. The stream was directed towards the neck area. At the same time, he turned his head to his son and said that food was on the table. When the young man wants to eat, he must warm it up for himself. The young man nodded. At the same time, he was very enthusiastic. I read the book Moog Legislation. The father was already getting ready to leave. Opened the door, and he also asked his son not to stay up late, because Yusheng had an important exam tomorrow. As you know, to successfully pass the exam, you need to be well prepared and, importantly, get enough sleep. The young man said that he knew everything, would definitely prepare, and would not stay up late. The man in a high mood shouted out that he was going on a date. He hoped that his son would do well in the exam. The young man was reading a book. He was focused. The door closed loudly behind his father. The guy actually shuddered. The father has already left. The guy dialed a combination of numbers on his mobile phone. He called the police. Yushen told the police that there would be a sexual assault at the Sophie Hotel, room 302, at 8 p.m. today. The policeman asked him if he had clearly seen the license plate number. The young man confirmed that he was 100% sure that the number was correct. The policeman asked the young man how they were connected with the person who had come to the room. He replied that it was his father. Everything was in order. He believed that he had not set his father up at all, but he simply served the people, because that's what his duty dictates, and everything must be legal. He sat down at the table to refresh himself. I began to remember that tomorrow the awakening ceremony would take place. The guy wasn't sure if he could actually open the patterned egg. He couldn't understand where it came from in his head. It's like a scroll of the dead. He wondered if something would change after he woke up. Half an hour later, there was a mountain of dirty dishes in the sink. The young man was sitting on the sofa and carefully reading a book. He saw that a policeman was calling his phone. The young man decided that the policeman had dialed by accident and picked up the phone. Yushen received the call and answered. Swear words were heard on the phone. It was his father. He was detained by the police. He was upset that he was so unlucky. He asked the young man to quickly take the money and come to the station to post bail. My father was just yelling into the phone. The young man held the phone at arm's length so as not to go deaf. I could hear my father perfectly, even without putting my mobile phone to my ear. He shouted that there was a key under the bed in his bedroom. They needed to open the back door of the neighboring house where Widow Wang lives. The money is located directly under the vat with preparations. The young man mumbled something inaudibly. He did everything as his father said. I took the key under the bed. He opened the door of the neighboring house. And under the vat of preparations, he actually found money. The guy carefully counted the bills. Yu Shen counted 2,000. He put the money in his pocket and called the policeman back. He introduced himself and said that he was a relative of Yu San Shui. He also said that he would not pay bail. After all, breaking the law should be punishable. He also asked that his father be re-educated properly, and they made him a useful member of society. The guy repeated once again that the police would make his father a useful member of society. After all, this has always been the positive force that Moog spread. Everyone must honor and protect these foundations. Yu Shen ran down the alley. A girl was running next to him. She begged that they would not be caught up. Suddenly arrows flew at them. One more arrow would have hit the young man in the eye. They ran and tried to dodge the arrows flying after them. Someone behind commanded the guys to run faster. The guy and the girl ran up close to the wall. The wall was high. The top was tangled with barbed wire. It was impossible to get over it. It was a dead end. There was nowhere to run further. Behind them stood a group of guys armed with baseball bats. They shouted for the guy and girl to continue running, but there was nowhere to run. A guy with a toned torso, a chain around his neck, and a mohawk exclaimed. What seemed to him, or the fugitives want to leave their city of Zui. This was his dream. The guy with the mohawk gave the command to kill the fugitives, and a group of guys with knives in their hands and malicious smiles ran straight towards the guy and girl. The fugitives also grabbed a knife from their belts. A bloodbath began. The boys' bodies were scattered all over the place. There was a lot of blood. Lying in a pool of blood was the guy with the mohawk who gave the instructions. The girl and the guy stood next to each other. The bodies of the couples lay around them. They each held a knife with traces of blood in their hands. The girl told the guy that he could leave. The guy had a card in his hand. He thought about it. On the card was the inscription passage. Suddenly a passage opened in front of him. Light fell from the passage. The guy walked into the light. Yu Shen opened his eyes and sat up on the bed. He was in his bed. And this fight with the guys was just a terrible dream that he had. Perhaps one of the episodes of his past life came to him in a dream, when he was still living in a crime-ridden city. The guy sighed with relief and looked out the window. He has an exam at school today. The guy slowly trudged to his studies. He heard his classmates talking. One of them said that he was so worried yesterday that he did not sleep a wink. The other guy replied that he did the same. He just doesn't know if he will be able to wake up and pull out the patterned ones. The guy was going to the exam. The exam took place in the preparatory class. Class teacher Liu Qingfeng said that the awakening exam will begin in an hour. He continued. Perhaps now the students hope to awaken themselves and pull out good talent. He told the students to try and strengthen themselves, then kill the evil spirits, conquer the city, and gain universal respect. He clenched his hand into a fist. He asked me to drown my enemies in their blood, help people prosper, and of course force myself to be respected. But if the disciples end up behind, serving the people, then why bother trying at all? The students began to repeat enthusiastically, to help people prosper, to serve the people. Yu Shen was mentally not in the audience. Therefore I repeated, to serve the people or the people they serve. The teacher looked angrily at the student, and mentally called the guy a bastard. The teacher looked at his watch. He said it was time. He asked the students to go to the awakening point. The teacher looked after Yu Shen. He was very curious to know how many patterns this bastard would awaken. The exam started at school. The students lined up in 3 rows. They passed through a metal detector one by one to identify metal objects. Similar detectors are located at airports to check luggage and passengers before boarding a flight. Each student walked under the metal detector. If the device starts beeping, it means there is a metal object in your pocket or on your clothing. This could be a coin in your pocket, a chain around your neck, earrings, and so on. Only after verification could the student be allowed to take the exam. The girl walked up to the equipment and raised her hand. 4 patterns were revealed. It was cool. The girl was happy. One of the teachers recorded the results. He told the girl that she had good talent. If the law enforcement system hatches, it can go into the police department. And he added that she need not worry any longer. Since the resurrection of Qi, the animals have increased in size and become stronger. Extraordinary powers also awakened in people. During awakening, an egg appears behind the person. The patterns on it determine the abilities of the awakened one. The maximum number of patterns that one student can receive is 9, and the one who awakens all the patterns will become the greatest of the living. The teacher called the next student to go through the metal detector. It was Yu Shen. He approached the detector. The light on the device turned red and a characteristic sound was heard. The teacher asked the young man whether he had metal objects with him. The young man said that he always carries a couple of knives with him for self-defense. The teacher demanded that Yu Shen pull them out. After all, the equipment for awakening was very expensive. Metal could affect the test result. Therefore, before taking the test, it was necessary to get rid of all metal objects. The young man agreed. He began to pull out knives and all sorts of other items for self-defense from his belt, from his sleeves, from his suit pockets. There were a lot of them. The teacher had a surprised face. He asked if there was anything else in the pockets. The student said no. My classmates were whispering behind me. They wondered who this guy was who was hiding so many weapons. Yu Shen approached the detector again. The characteristic sound was heard again. The teacher again asked if he had anything else. The guy thought about it, and he replied that perhaps the detector was catching his iron will. The teacher, raising his voice, ordered him to pull everything out. The guy took off his jacket and shook out the remaining pieces of iron. He replied that he definitely doesn't have anything metal on him now. There weren't even any trump cards left, he added mentally. This time the detector missed him. He walked over to the equipment and raised his hand to it. He put his hand to the ball. The device began to emit light. An egg appeared behind the guy's back, and there were 9 patterns on it. Incredible. As many as 9 patterns, maximum number. Everyone looked at the student in surprise. The teacher couldn't believe his eyes. He repeated the result haltingly. Yu Shen said that most likely the equipment was broken and the result was false. The teacher refuted the student's words. The equipment was not broken. It worked fine. At that moment, the guy hit the equipment with his fist and it shattered. The teacher was very surprised. After breaking expensive equipment, the student repeated once again that it was broken. And this time, it was true. Smoke was rising from the equipment. Suddenly, the class teacher grabbed the student's hand. He said the youth had damaged public property, and he asked him to go with him. They walked away, and the teacher showed the student the radiance. The glow resembled a large blue firebird. They were already sitting on the firebird. The teacher stood nearby. Yu Shen did not understand what this meant. The firebird flew high above the school and flew into the distance. The young man sat on it and looked at it as if the students who stood on the field were very, very small. The same scroll appeared before his eyes, which appeared to him mainly in his dreams. Was it really him who reacted this way? Yu Sheng was called to the school principal. The director wearing glasses was sitting at the table. The secretary stood next to him. The teacher and student stood opposite the table. The director began to read the student's personal file. It indicated that the student entered their school 6 months ago. He is now 18 years old. The director looked sternly at the young man and asked, "Is he really from a crime city?" The class teacher and secretary were also surprised by the fact that he was from a crime-ridden city. Yu Shen thought about it. According to his data, if the scroll really opens during awakening, then what kind of power is this? The young man did not know what this meant. The class teacher reprimanded the student. The director was talking to him, but Yu Shen stood lost in his thoughts and heard nothing. The young man mentally returned to the director's room. The director thought about it. The guy developed an egg with 9 patterns. He was undoubtedly the lucky one. But he was from a crime-ridden city. The director, after thinking, turned to the young man again. He asked a strange question. If only he had awakened 6 times or even 9 times. What would you do? The student replied that he would serve the people. The director clarified whether this guy is really from a criminal city. After all, his thoughts were very lofty. The director continued asking questions. He asked what the guy did before he entered the school. The guy thought for a while and answered. Yesterday his father went to see prostitutes, and he personally reported this incident to the police. Does this count as an answer to the question? The director broke out in a cold sweat. The secretary who stood behind the director began to laugh. The director asked the guy to forget everything they talked about. First, it wouldn't hurt for him to rest. And the director also asked the guy not to tell anyone about the results of the awakening, and he added that he would think about what to do next with his studies. The guy thanked the director, said goodbye, and headed out. The director, seeing the young man off, thought that, having such good inclinations, he managed to get out of the criminal city. The guy approached his house. He put his hand on the doorknob. There were traces of blood on the handle. The guy suggested that someone most likely broke into his house. Yu Shen entered the house. A guy was sitting in the room and rummaging through the closet. He was looking for something. There were traces of blood around the room. Suddenly the villain heard that someone had come into the house. He picked up the knife and quietly walked to the door to look. Before he could get to the door, he froze in surprise. Yu Shen beat him to it and brought the knife to his neck. He ordered him not to move. The blade was a few centimeters from the aorta. If he presses a little, the guy might die. Yu Shen added that he was annoyed by cleaning the floors. The guy who broke into the house said he was just looking for medicine and didn't hurt anyone. Yu Shen suggested that the healing potion was on the shelf in front. For greater clarity, he pointed to that place with his finger. Yu Shen asked why the guy didn't take the medicine, because he was seriously injured. There were bloody trails all over the room. The red-haired guy said that there was nothing wrong and he didn't need medicine. He asked Yu Shen why he still hadn't lowered his blade. Does he really want to kill him? Yu Shen replied that it is illegal to kill outside the crime city, and that's why he won't do it. The red-haired guy breathed a sigh of relief. He said that Yu Shen should think that he owes him his life. The debt is obligated to repay. And he asked the owner of the house if he needed his help. Yu Shen thought for a second and said, if he owed him, then will the red-haired guy kill himself? The guy was scared. He thought that Yu Shen had short-circuited. It was obvious he didn't need his life, and he replied that he was really a murderer and could kill someone for free, but not himself. Yu Shen was in no hurry to lower his blade. He said okay, and asked the red-haired guy to kill himself. The guy stood in bewilderment. He burst into tears and shouted that he had done nothing to Yu Shen. Why did he want him dead? Yu Shen explained the reason. Because he broke into his room and stained his floor. If he were in a criminal city now, he would be dead already on the threshold. The guy was surprised when he heard about the criminal city. He did not believe this could not happen, because in a criminal city there is an annual quota for the acquittal of one person. And since Yu Shen was too young, this was impossible. Yu Shen said that the guy is very talkative, and he doesn't like it. The red-haired guy began to cry. Tears streamed down his face. He agreed that he had said some bullshit. And in this case, since he committed a fine today, he ordered Yu Shen to begin. The red-haired guy closed his eyes and mentally began to say goodbye to life. He said goodbye to the world, and he said that in his next life he would definitely become the best killer in the world. He froze, waiting, imagining how Yu Shen would deal with him now. But at that moment nothing happened. A few more seconds passed, but the guy remained alive. He opened his eyes slightly to see what was happening. Isn't he dead yet? The red-haired guy looked at Yu Shen and asked why he didn't start. The young man replied that murder outside the crime city is illegal and he can't do it. Otherwise the police will find him and put him in prison. The guy was taken aback. He asked menacingly if Yu Shen was mocking him. If he doesn't want to kill, he can just let him go, and don't make a show out of it. But Yu Shen was not begging. He was not going to let go of the killer who snuck into his house. He had completely different plans for this. The red-haired guy wondered why his interlocutor was constantly talking about illegal actions. He told Yu Shen that he always repeats the word is illegal, but holding someone against his will is also a violation. It turns out that at the moment, Yu Shen is automatically an intruder and a criminal. Yu Shen was familiar with the Moj criminal code. After all, he constantly read this book and studied the laws. He replied that the Moj criminal code provides for punishment for this, 3 years in prison. In case of serious violation, from 5 to 8 years in prison. Yu Shen asked how old the red-haired guy was. He replied that he was 17. He was a little younger than Yu Shen. Yu Shen thought about it. This guy was only 17 and hadn't even woken up yet. The young man removed the blade from the villain's throat. He sheathed the blade under his clothes. The young man answered the red-haired guy that he could go. The guy couldn't believe his ears. He asked if it was true that he could go. Yu Shen cackled, and he said goodbye to the guy with a hand gesture. The guy was happy. Finally he got rid of the eccentric and his life is not in danger. He began to quickly run away. He had already reached the front door. Yes, this was exactly the door through which he entered this house. The guy exclaimed joyfully that he was now free. But at that moment a hand appeared. It was Yu Shen's hand. He grabbed the guy's shirt and squeezed his hand tightly. Yu Shen pulled the guy back into the house. The red-haired guy screamed. He fell to the floor and asked what he was doing. Yu Shen calmly replied that the guy went outside the room. Now it does not restrict his freedom, so this is not considered unlawful detention. The guy was very upset. He did not understand who Yu Shen was and what he had thought of. Yu Shen said that the red-haired guy was seriously injured, since the blood was flowing down his clothes all this time and did not stop. He asked him once again not to move, and he went to get some medicine. The red-haired guy is obliged to wipe all the blood from the floor, otherwise, and Shen threw the guy a cute and a brush. Yu Shen walked to the locker and opened it. It was a cabinet with various medicines. He chuckled and turned to the guy. The guy fell to the floor and began to diligently scrub the floor. He did it quickly. The bloodstains disappeared from the floor at lightning speed. Yu Shen brought the necessary medicine and handed it to the wounded man. The guy thanked him. Yu Shen added that the medicine had expired. The red-haired guy was upset by this. Yu Shen looked at him carefully. He expected exactly this reaction. The guy was annoyed. Yu Shen was thinking at this moment. Energy is born from negative emotions, but he still needs to evoke them. Yu Shen briefly remembered the package that had appeared in his thoughts so often. This time the guy was joking. He just wanted to evoke negative emotions in the wounded guy and analyze. He said it was a joke. The medicine is suitable for use and is not expired, but the wounded guy needs to drink it immediately. Otherwise, he will die from blood loss within 32 minutes. The wounded man did not know this, and he was very surprised. He quickly opened the box and took a few pills. He also took off his t-shirt and began to rewind himself. Sometimes he screamed. He was in pain. The contemplation of his blood horrified the guy. Yu Sheng watched him carefully and said that he did not look like a murderer at all. He asked the guy whether he was definitely a killer. The guy replied that he only missed once, and he asked to give him some time. His names were Li and Han, and he is 100% sure that he will become the greatest killer in the future. Yu Shen looked at the guy suspiciously. The wounded guy replied that he would forget everything, and he still won't understand it. Yu Shen said that to become a killer, you need to devote yourself entirely to it. But is it worth it? The guy had already completely wrapped himself in a bandage, he was wearing a t-shirt, and he said that he was not afraid of death. His dream is to die nobly, like a real killer. After all, then everyone around him will be proud of him as the most fearless. Yu Shen asked the guy why he didn't kill him then. Then he could calmly leave. The red-haired guy replied that he had his own special professional principles. If he was paid money, he will definitely help. For him, killing is work, not some kind of entertainment. Nobody hired him to kill Yu Shen, so he doesn't touch him. Yu Shen said that the guy is lying, he simply won't be able to do it. And he added that a little more, and he would believe that the red-haired guy was a real killer. Yu Shen added that the killer in the guy had not yet awakened. Who would want to hire someone like him? The wounded guy told a little about himself. The fact that he only became an adult half a month ago. And soon the awakening ceremony will take place. When receiving the order, he lied about his age. Otherwise, he simply would not have received the first order, only he didn't think at all. That there is such a big difference between the awakened and the non-awakened. Even if he could only awaken a spoon. At the same time, the spoon crashed into his chest and injured him. That's why there was a wound on his chest and he lost so much blood. Yu Shen understood everything. He was about to leave. At the same time, he told the guy to get medical treatment and not to forget to wash the floors. And when he gets ready to leave, he should pick up the trash at the entrance and throw it out. The guy asked again. Yu Shen lets him go or not. He repeated that as soon as the guy finished cleaning, he could leave. Otherwise, he will owe his life. And he added that if he needed it, he would easily find it. In the meantime, he can live in peace. Yu Shen remembered something as he left. He added that the awoken are not as strong as he thinks. They have a certain gift. But power comes when they know how to use this gift correctly. This was 100 years ago. The forces of Qi have been resurrected. And after that evil spirits rose. She was rampant, threatening the kingdom of people. But fortunately, the first awakened ones appeared. And sacrificing their strength and lives, they founded 4 great outposts. Outpost of pacification of evil spirits, Outpost of Dawn, Outpost of the Dome, Outpost of Demons. 4 outposts stop evil spirits, and human masters stand guard over them, keeping evil out. Yu Shen walked through the city and dreamed. He heard someone say that the outpost for pacifying the evil spirits could not stand. 2 guys were looking at the phone and talking loudly. One said that monsters appeared in Shanghai, and many people suffered. On the screen was a photograph of the monster that appeared in Shanghai and which led to the death of people. The guys were upset. They didn't understand how this could happen. What then does the Ministry of Exorcism do? How could it allow this to happen? The young man added that things were becoming uneasy on Earth, and it was good that nothing like that had happened here yet. Yu Shen slowly moved away from the guys. He was on his way to the stall, and now he finally got there. The stall sold a lot of goodies. The guy entered the stall. The salesman was sitting behind the counter. He was wearing a t-shirt and was yawning. Everything indicated that the seller had just woken up, or he was completely asleep at work, and the guy woke him up with his appearance. He looked carefully into the young man's eyes. He said that there was a product and pointed to a sealed package that was lying on the table. The guy was not happy with this deal. He said that this was the last time he came for the goods. The seller said that now they are even. Yu Shen turned around and began to leave, and he told the seller that they would definitely see each other again. The seller smiled sarcastically. He believed that this would not happen soon. The seller walked away from the counter and repeated that they would never meet again. Yu Shen came to his home. He sat down on the bench in the kitchen and opened the envelope. From the envelope, he took out a bright red crystal, and he began to look at him carefully. It was a demonic quintessence crystal that evil spirits create after absorbing human vitality. He picked up a crossbow. He placed several coasters in his room. He perched a crossbow on stands, which were directed in different directions of his room. I tied a rope to each crossbow. He tied one end of the rope to the handle of the front door. This mechanism would start a chain reaction and lead to a line of crossbows the moment someone opens the door. He collected all the ropes in his hand. This would allow him to trigger the crossbow's trigger mechanism at a distance. He squatted down and thought. Suddenly, something began to happen to the crystal. A bright red light began to emanate from it. The outpost for pacifying evil spirits looked like a high rock. The approach to it was shrouded in barbed wire. There were people at the outpost. They always wore cloaks and hoods. People were descending from the outpost. Suddenly, the young man saw that the road was closed. He was also told about this by an elder who was sitting cross-legged and meditating. The guy fell to his knees in front of the elder and begged him to open the way. They had to get through. The elder looked at him carefully, and once again he strictly repeated that the road was closed. The young man was restless. He insisted that the old man open the way. Some unknown force began to fly over the outpost for pacifying evil spirits. The staff rose above the elder. The old man shouted, "Death!" A black funnel formed above the people. The guys were horrified. The young man told the old man that he was just joking. His divine guidance has served the human race for a long time, sacrificing everything. They would not have dared to challenge the elder. The young men turned around and went back where they came. As soon as the guys turned their backs to the old man, a question was asked. The elder asked the young man if he wanted to go through. The guy was delighted and asked if he had any more advice. The elder repeated that when they returned, they would have to tell their divine throne to change his name. And he added, if he had not had to defend this place, where it was not appropriate to raise a hand, then the young man would already be dead. The young man laughed, thanked him for the advice, and promised the elder that he would definitely pass it on. The young men went further along the road. The elder watched them carefully. The staff rose above him again and energy swirled. A week later, Yu Shen sat in his room, furnished with crossbows. A red crystal floated in front of him. 2 gray crystals lay on the floor. Yu Sheng's phone rang, but the guy didn't respond. Suddenly, the crystal, which had previously been floating in the air, dressed in red, fell to the floor. It changed its color from red to gray. The young man opened his eyes. He immediately picked up the phone and answered the call. The call was from his class teacher, Liu Qingfeng. He asked the young man to return to school tomorrow morning. A person from the Ministry of Exorcism will come. He will conduct certification of trained students. Resources will be allocated to the best one. This certification is very important. Only one student will pass. The teacher said that it did not matter whether Yu Shen could pass, but asked him to try. The young man agreed to try. The class teacher asked the student why he could not reach his father. The young man replied that most likely in the prison where his father is now, they are not allowed to use mobile phones. The teacher remembered that the young man's father was in prison. He had practically forgotten. It was this guy who turned his father in for dating prostitutes, which is why he is now behind bars. Yu Shen walked over and looked at the calendar carefully. He thought that there were 312 days left. The next day, the young man came to school. He sat in class, deep in thought. He propped his head up with his hand. Perhaps he could think better in this position. Classmates were animatedly discussing something. They were worried about who would be chosen. Who will this lucky guy be? Everyone wanted to become the best and fight monsters. One guy said that if he is not chosen, he will fly away. Their class teacher entered the class and the students fell silent. The teacher said that a notification had just arrived and everything had changed. He continued his speech. This time, not only the Ministry of Exorcism, but also reserve officers from the Ministry of Security came from Shenli. The certification format has also changed. Each school will nominate 5 suitable students, after which they will be eliminated. In the end, only one will remain, the best. The students began to mentally ask that they be chosen. Even if they were weeded out later, everyone still wanted to shine their face among these lucky ones. The teacher raised his hand and said, "Which of their class?" The director decided to choose. It sounded like a sentence. All the students waited with bated breath. The teacher said the name Yu Shen. Indignant statements were heard. The guy was outraged. He asked why Yu Shen was suddenly chosen. Someone confirmed that he is a weakling. The students began shouting the name Hey Mu. According to most, he was the ideal candidate. A farce began in the class. The teacher asked for silence. He asked the students, do they disagree? Was the choice made unfairly? He asked the students to remember that there is no justice in this life. If, when you are not treated unfairly, then you need to endure and improve yourself until you break the injustice. And here it is useless to shout. You just need to work on yourself and then everything will work out. The students sat at their desks with their eyes downcast. They were upset. The teacher asked Yu Shen to go to the principal's office, who wanted to meet with the young man. Yu Shen agreed. The young man stood in front of the director. The man looked at the student. He was surprised by the fact that the student was so cheerful. He asked if everything was okay with his father. The young man replied that fraud in a criminal city is expensive. The class teacher looked questioningly at the young man. The director also did not understand what the young man wanted to say with these words. The teacher cleared his throat and said it was time to get to the main point. This certification checks not only the student, but also the school in which he studies. Mobe is a small town. 3 schools are not very famous. Therefore, management is planning a merger. Who will be the director of the new school will most likely depend on this certification. If you act wisely, everyone will benefit. He asked Yu Shen, no matter what happens, not to give in. The young man asked what the price would be. The director asked again in surprise, as if he had not heard his question. The young man said that according to the rules of the crime city, if someone asks a person for something, then in return he must pay him. This is right. Yu Shen emphasized that he would not take on this matter for free. The teacher looked at his student in surprise. The guy was not as simple as it seemed at first glance. The director said that the young man would pass the exam, and this benefits not only the director, but also Yu Shen. The guy replied that, if he understood correctly, the director needed him to do this, and the exam is just a ticket that someone has to finance. This will be a kind of fee for the service performed. In a crime-ridden city, people who don't follow the rules die quickly. It was clear that the director was angry. He was wondering what kind of city this was, so criminal. The director was ready to give him 3 crystals of the first level. The guy replied that he agreed to such an agreement. He already wanted to leave, but I asked one more question. Will it be necessary to kill someone? The director was shocked, as was his assistant. He cried out in alarm that no, there is no need to kill anyone. The young man said good, because it was forbidden to kill outside the criminal city, and he added that 3 soul stones were missing. The principal asked the young man to rest on the school bus, and he also said that other students should not worry him. He just needs to forget about them and not worry about it, and also remember that you can't kill anyone. The guy agreed and left. He was sitting on a school bus. Suddenly a guy greeted him. His name was Zhao Zichen. He was from 9B. Zhao introduced his friends to the girl Li Kai and the boy Yang Ruoxin. He asked the young man his name. The young man replied that his name was Yu Shen. The guy told Yu Shen that Mayor Moj would secretly attend the certification this year. Their Mobe was very small, and Moj did not have much strength, so Premier's son is also Elder Mog, and he believes the best talent comes from there. Previously, Master Defenders also came out of Mobe. They provided resources, then raised a new generation. The Masters left, and the newcomers became Defenders. If you join Moge, you will become famous, and whoever is chosen, everyone will be watching the exam. From the above, it follows that this is a unique opportunity to become successful. Zhao said that other schools also have many Masters. He suggested that, as a rule, one candidate is chosen and the other 3 are used as backup. This way, the chosen one will have more chances. Winning won't be that easy. The girl behind laughed and said that without exception, head girl Zhao would definitely win. Headman Zhao's father is the head of the Mobe security department. The guy sitting next to him added that Headman Zhao was chosen for certification. He added that one word from him and he could count on their support. Zhao was inspired. He replied, if so, then willy-nilly he will have to get this victory. Zhao told Yu Shen to relax. After all, he will have brilliant prospects. Yu Shen asked if it was true that his father was the head of the security department. Zhao replied yes, the most real one. Yu Shen told the guy in confidence that his father was currently in prison. Zhao replied that it was not a question. If he had not broken anything serious, he could put in a good word with his father, and Yu Sheng's father would be released. Yu Sheng shook his head negatively. That's not what he meant at all. He asked Zhao otherwise. Yu Shen wanted his father's sentence to be increased. Zhao was confused. He didn't expect Yu Shen to ask such a thing. Zhao thought about how much one must hate one's own father in order to put him in prison on purpose. At the same time, I also want to increase his term. It was mean. Zhao, lost in thought, looked out the window. Yu Shen was stunned. He didn't understand why the gray energy wasn't exuding this time. Did he do something wrong? The bus was leaving the city. Yu Shen thoughtfully rushed out the window. Zhao jumped up and asked that they were leaving the city and added whether the certification would really be carried out outside the city. Zhao turned to the driver. Perhaps the driver took the wrong route and went the wrong way. After all, recently there was an incident in Xinhai, and now it's not safe at all outside the city. The driver replied that there was no mistake. They changed places for a while. There is an old factory not far from the city. That's where the certification will take place, and the bus goes there. The driver continued that it is more convenient outside the city because there is a lot of space there. He also said that there was nothing to worry about because they had people from Moj with them, so there was no danger. Zhao agreed and asked the driver to shout when they arrived at the place. After all, the students wanted to take a nap. The driver agreed. Yushen didn't want to sleep at all. Thoughts were spinning in my head. The driver shouted that they had arrived. Several school buses were already parked in front of the old factory building. The students left the bus. Zhao exclaimed that they had finally arrived. Everything was as said. Zhao saw a guy he knew. He was surprised that he came here too. Zhao said that Dushu also came. This is the same talent of 6 patterns. The guys began to animatedly discuss Dushu. What a beard he has. How he was able to grow such thickets and many other questions. Yushen moved a little away from the guys. Zhao turned to Yushen and said that although they had not agreed in advance, he hoped that the young man would avoid this Dushu because he was very strong. Yushen agreed. Zhao hoped that Yushen would not lose, and he called him second. The students approached the doors. In the distance, a warrior was smoking and carefully watching the students. He threw the cigarette butt on the floor and put it out with his foot. The driver went in the other direction. He entered a room with CCTV cameras where a man was sitting. The young man asked how things were. The driver replied that things were not going well. The driver sat down in the chair and began to talk. That students have low vigilance, easily trust strangers, and think naively. A remote city with self-government is just a dream. The driver thought at that moment. He pointed his finger at one of the monitors. Yushen was passing there at that moment. And he added that this guy should be of interest. The students were already lined up. The leader came out in front of him and began the story. That this time he will be in charge of the certification. The topics of the certification are not yet known. It is necessary to wait for the people from the Ministry of Exorcism, then everything will become clearer. The manager reiterated that this was a unique opportunity, and so that the students would hack themselves to death. You always need to be careful and act only with a clear head. If they follow his advice, only then will they have a chance of success. The leader looked at Yushen and thought, this time he doesn't know if this guy can surprise him. Suddenly a gate opened behind the students. Everyone looked around in surprise. An SUV drove through the gate at speed. He parked noisily near the students. A foot shod in gray sneakers appeared from the car. A man came out. He was tall, with a slender build, and his hair was styled in a stylish hairstyle. He had black glasses on his eyes, and he held a cigarette in his teeth. He walked past the students, and he approached the manager. The man hugged him by the shoulders. He called the leader Old Man Liu. As it turned out, they were old acquaintances, but had not seen each other for many years. The man asked how the leader ended up here. The leader replied that he works as a teacher and came here with his students, since today there will be certification. The man was surprised. He looked over his glasses at the teacher. He couldn't believe that his old friend was now a teacher. The man furrowed his brow. And then he said that in general it's not bad. At least it's not as dangerous as theirs. He looked carefully at the students, and with a smile he clarified that these girls and boys are his students. The students were whispering among themselves at this moment. They didn't understand this man from the ministry or from Moog. He seemed creepy to them. Damn. He looked straight at them, and some students felt weak in their legs. The man looked carefully at each of their students. He approached Yushen and asked if he was afraid of him. The young man answered why he should be afraid of him. The man laughed. He patted the young man on the shoulder and said that this was not bad, and he told Old Man Liu that this guy was interesting. The man addressed the students. He introduced himself to the guys. His name was Luo Tian, and he was from the Ministry of Exorcism of Jianbei Province. He was the captain of the 3rd Squad, the 5th generation of awakened ones. He said that it was enough to know this, and he would not talk about other achievements, because there was nothing interesting there, so there was nothing to boast about. And what about today's certification? And he fell silent for a minute. He needed to think. He took a drag on his cigarette, and I couldn't think of what was better. The disciples looked at this man questioningly. Some thought appeared in his head, and he laughed. He said the guys should win the fight. Whoever wins is the one who stays. Whoever loses will leave. One of the girls exclaimed that this was what the certification was all about. The teacher looked at his friend in surprise and thought that this man had not changed at all. The man said it was time to start. And some unknown force rose above him in the form of a wolf. An unknown force began to move faster. She began to circle, and a circle of light formed. The man said that this circle would be a kind of ring. If a student gives up or steps outside the circle, it is considered a failure and they are eliminated. He quickly chose 2 guys, pointed his finger at them and ordered them to fight. One of the boys came closer to the ring. He folded his arms and introduced himself. He is the first, his name is Xiao Zifeng, and he asked for instructions. The competitors ran to the center of the circle. They entered the ring and began to fight. One of the guys jumped up and prepared to strike. The other guy also screamed and rushed towards me. The battle has begun. Everything happened so quickly that it resembled a cloud of dust with arms and legs showing. The leader and the man in black watched the battle. Not a drop of military strength was visible. But it's okay, the students weren't from some big city. They were never taught martial arts. The fight stopped. One young man was lying on his back. The winner was Zi Feng. He asked those around him not to laugh at his performance. The man was amused by these words, and he added that Zi Feng won. The man showed the next two guys who were supposed to fight next. One of them was Yu Shen, the second was Du Shu. The enemy turned to the young man, and he confidently said that he would beat him. The class teacher looked at his student. He really hoped that he would surprise him. The young men entered the ring. Yu Sheng raised his hand and asked, "Is it possible to use weapons during a fight?" The man said it was natural. He can use any weapon he wants. The students began to discuss. This guy is definitely an idiot to ask such a thing. If he can use a weapon, then so can the enemy. The guy said that Du Shu would make Yu Shen disabled. Zhao suddenly shouted. He asked Yu Sheng not to let them down. It was clear that this guy was worried about Yu Shen. The man exhaled cigarette smoke and said it was time to start. Yu Shen squatted down. With one hand he rested on the floor, the other was pulled back away from him. He pushed his foot off the floor. And with speed he headed towards his opponent, who at that moment was holding a stick in his hands. Yu Shen ran towards the enemy with lightning speed. Blood appeared on the enemy's hand. It was the hand that was holding the stick that was wounded. The stick fell out and hit the floor. Du Shu cried out in pain. He was holding a hand from which scarlet blood was flowing. Yu Shen was holding a sharp metal object in his hand at this moment. Du Shu fell to his knees and screamed hysterically in pain. Yu Shen walked up to him. A knife was already visible behind his back. He put his hand on his face and pushed him. Du Shu fell on his back. Yu Shen raised his knife. Du Shu thought that the young man wanted to kill him. He started screaming that it was just a competition and begged them not to kill him. Yu Shen held his knife over his opponent. He swung and stuck his knife next to his opponent's head. Du Shu was horrified. His whole life flashed before his eyes in an instant. When the enemy realized that he was alive and the young man was just joking, he yelled that Yu Shen was mocking him. At that moment, a man approached the guys. Oh laughed loudly. Yu Shen grabbed his opponent and forced his mouth open. He put his fingers into his mouth. The man with glasses was surprised. He asked what he wanted to do. And he pulled the tooth out of Du Shu's mouth. He looked at his tooth and asked why there was no poison. Most likely he hides it somewhere else. The young man began to rummage through his hair. He was clearly looking for something. The man scratched the back of his head in surprise and asked, "Is he accidentally looking for poison?" Yu Shen said he was looking, but everything is somehow strange. He cannot find where the enemy is hiding the poison. The man asked a question. Is there a possibility that he is not hiding it? And he raised his index finger up. Yu Shen looked at the man carefully, and he said that this could not happen. If he is captured by an enemy and does not have poison, he will not be able to kill himself. His torment will be worse than death. Du Shu had tears streaming down his cheeks. Du Shu thought about it. This is true. Why didn't he hide the poison? Then he could kill himself at any moment. Then he exclaimed that he has no need to hide the poison. After all, he has a wonderful life now. What kind of thoughts are these to kill yourself? A man walked up behind Yu Sheng. He realized that most likely the guy was from a crime-ridden city, and he asked the young man about it. The guy confirmed that he was indeed from a criminal city, and he was surprised that people did not hide poison outside the criminal city. He just couldn't believe it. The man asked the class teacher if he knew about this. The class teacher asked what this had to do with his student. The class teacher said that according to the rules, it did not matter whether he had committed heinous crimes in the past. After leaving the crime city, this is not discussed. The class teacher came closer to the man in black, and he repeated that it is not discussed only if he has not killed someone again. Otherwise, one day without mistakes is enough for him, and he is his student forever. Yu Shen stood behind the teacher. The man scratched his head and said that it would be better to forget this conversation. After all, his enemies are evil spirits, not people. And he added that today, we can finish this. The man turned and said that the certification would continue tomorrow. The plant is large, and there is enough room for everyone to stay overnight. He pointed towards one of the rooms and asked to sleep there. The man walked up to his car and asked the class teacher that they haven't seen each other for so long, that this is a great excuse to have a drink. The teacher said that it was unlikely because his students were still here. The man got into the car and told the teacher that his student was from the Forbidden City, and he added that it is difficult for him to predict whether he will pass the certification. A rat rustled in the corner. The students entered the room. They were upset. It was dirty all around. It was impossible to sit on the floor, let alone sleep the whole night. They were angry that they had to stay here overnight. Everything indicated that not only cockroaches lived here, but also huge rats. But the students did not know what to do. One young man began to say that he did not want to spend the night here under any circumstances. One of the students approached the teacher. He said there was one thing he didn't understand. The teacher was sitting on the floor and was ready to listen to him. The young man said why it turns out that the higher the talent, the higher the level in the future. Or he's wrong. The young man asked why that man from the ministry did not look at the talents of the others. The teacher said that talent alone cannot lead to the top. Someone exclaimed that there are enough geniuses everywhere. With such a large population, the emergence of geniuses is common. The teacher said that if only talent was needed, then people would have suppressed the evil spirits long ago. The teacher said that in his time he had seen a lot of geniuses, but only a few of them rose to prominence. The young man thought about it, and the teacher continued that considering his talent an extraordinary gift, and considering himself above everyone else is tantamount to arrogance. He saw people make mistakes in the simplest things. The lucky ones who studied at famous schools entered the outpost to pacify evil spirits. And when they saw the evil spirits, they trembled with fear, did not kill a single one, and were eventually beheaded. The teacher saw this with his own eyes. What this world is missing most is geniuses. Take anyone in Moj, they are all stronger than you. But at what price is this given to them? The students listened thoughtfully to the teacher's speech. The teacher also said that the disciples did not go through the 4 great gates. After all, human life means nothing there. Cheaper than a sip of water or a piece of bread. Whether a person can survive is not talent. This is character, this is luck. Without decisiveness and a cool head, without sufficient prudence, it can be just a joke. The students were silent. They pondered the teacher's words. The teacher said that now it is necessary to rest. After all, the certification will continue tomorrow. One young man replied that he was not that tired, and there is such dirt around that he will not be able to sleep in such conditions. The teacher sternly asked the young man, "Is he really disdainful? He doesn't want to sleep among cut-off limbs. After all, there are more important situations. When you fall asleep, you are not sure whether you will wake up tomorrow or not." And the teacher threateningly called everyone to sit down. He also repeated that compared to the 4 outposts, these are still flowers. He called to look at Yu Shen. The young man simply sat down on the floor. He considered himself no better than anyone in this room. Does he seem arrogant? Yu Shen watched silently. He didn't like being made an example of. At that moment, he found himself in the center of attention. Everyone looked at the guy with wide eyes. Yu Shen leaned on his knee and began to rise. Zhao asked where he was going to go. The young man replied that he was going to go to the toilet. When the young man walked away, Zhao said that although Yu Sheng is gloomy, he is a good guy. The girl apparently did not agree with this. She asked what he showed. Zhao sighed fatally. Yu Shen walked carefully. He pressed himself against the wall so as not to accidentally fall into the cell. There were cameras everywhere here. He slowly made his way, hugging the cameras. Seeing another camera, he decided that it was most likely the last. He didn't know if there was anything else at the plant. He analyzed the situation. The entire plant was in cells. But the guy knew that there was probably some place where there were no cameras. He decided that he needed to check all the rooms and find the place where there was no camera. He quickly ran into the factory premises. Yu Sheng made his way and looked into every room. I walked on. He approached one of the doors. According to his feelings, this was exactly the room where there was not a single camera. He reached out his hand to the handle. He opened the door a little and heard someone talking. The conversation was about Liu Qingfeng. Someone found out if there was any information about the teacher. The interlocutor replied that no. There were people in the room. One of the men said that if we remember the conversation between the teacher and the man from the ministry, we can conclude that he too was at the outpost of pacifying evil spirits. The man added that Liu Qingfeng is a good teacher, but he is wasting his talent here. Another voice said that they wanted to offer the teacher a transfer to the regional center. After all, his pedagogical methods deserve attention. Yu Shen listened carefully to their conversation. He knew that eavesdropping was not good, but if it helped to find out useful information, then sometimes it was okay. Yu Shen looked into the room. There were 2 men standing there, and the driver of the bus who was taking the students to the factory was sitting. The room in which there was not a single camera was a monitor room. Yu Shen returned back. Almost all of the students were asleep. The teacher sat in the corner, resting his head on his hand and dozing. The young man tried to pass so as not to wake up the teacher. But the teacher was not sleeping. He asked the young man a question. Has he prepared his lone wolf plan? The young man sat down in the corner and thought. It was night outside. Yu Shen looked and listened carefully. He heard some noise. The teacher looked at him menacingly. The young man held a crossbow in his hand. The teacher saw the crossbow in his hand, but he said that it did not concern him. Yu Shen headed towards the exit. The teacher looked after him and thought that it is the loners who most often suffer a tragic end. There was a man from the ministry standing on the street who came to the students during the day in an SUV. He had a huge dog on a chain. Approaching the room where the students were staying, he laughed, and he said that it was time for them to find out what the awakened ones who dared to sleep in the open air were really facing. At this moment, the man let go of the leash. The monster, opening its mouth wide, rushed forward. It was not a dog at all, but some kind of monster. Outwardly, he had some similarities with a huge dog. The monster's eyes glowed red. Patterns were painted on the body. The men who were in the monitor room saw an angry monster on the screen. They were horrified and did not understand why this demon appeared here. Then they shouted Luo Yun's name and called him an idiot. They assumed that it was his doing. They couldn't believe their eyes. Did he really want the students to try to kill the evil spirits? But they were still so young and inexperienced. They haven't even finished school yet. The men ran up to the bus driver, who was quietly dozing on the sofa, and began to wake him up. They called him Captain. Most likely he was in charge of them. The captain woke up and looked out from under his cap, and he said that there was no need to panic. Men can calm down and sit in their seats. How much trouble can one demon appear? But after thinking, I came to the conclusion that this is even good. After all, the school raised cram students. Maybe they learned something during their time at school. And I decided that it would even be useful for these students to look at blood. The man sitting behind the monitor screamed. Before doing this, the captain should have thought about the consequences. After all, playing with life is no joke. The captain pulled back the flap of his jacket. He showed the patch on his sleeve. It depicted a demonic creature. He said that this is exactly what can decide whether there will be trouble or not. The man calmed down a little and agreed. The captain lit a cigarette at that moment. He added that a little activity is not a bad thing. He wanted to see what the students were worth. The monster was aggressive. He growled throughout the area and quickly ran through the corridors in search of people. Another second, and he flew into the room where the students were. The students heard about the approaching danger. They had already woken up, and when the monster appeared, they began to scatter in different directions. The disciples could not understand how a demon could be here. The monster walked towards one of the students. The guy got scared and started calling for help. The monster grinned. His mouth was full of sharp teeth. Suddenly, Du Shu stood up for the guy. He stood in front of him and asked him not to be afraid, saying that he would protect him. The guy was holding a stick in front of him. The monster howled and prepared to jump. Another second, and it rushed towards Du Shu. The guy gasped and blood flew to the side. Suddenly, someone's foot hit the monster in the head. It was Zhao. He said not to be afraid, and covered Du Shu, who was wounded, and he offered to unite, then the demon would not be able to harm them. Panic began among the students. They called the teacher for help. They shouted that they were scared and wanted to go home. The teacher stood calmly against the wall and watched what was happening. He was in no hurry to run to help. He did not know whether such a test would really be useful for the students. At this time, the captain was watching the young men through the camera. He said these two guys are brave but a little dumb. They didn't know that the head of a hellhound is the strongest. But the fact that they were stubborn was also not bad. Suddenly, the captain remembered the student Yu Shen because he was noticeably annoyed by him. He wasn't in that room. The captain walked to the door and grabbed the handle to open it. He looked out and said that there was no need to look for him. Outside the door, he saw Yu Shen standing. The captain asked if he had come to sit. Yu Sheng was asked how he ended up here. The guy calmly replied that he was following the tracks. It was not entirely clear how he managed to do this. After all, it was simply impossible to get here following unclear traces. The man knew that the guy was from a crime city, but he didn't think that he would be so strange. Yu Shen sat down on the sofa. The men asked why he did not go to the aid of his classmates. Does he really want them all to die? The young man said that he was not going to help because they would not die. The captain shouted that he would not help the students. And if Yu Shen himself does not do this, then they will not cope and will die. The young man said that the hellhound just seems strong. In fact, she is weak. Therefore, even if the young man does not help them, they still will not die. The captain was already yelling. He asked what would happen to the students if the hound's powers increased. Yu Shen replied that they will not increase, and he knows that for sure. The captain threatened that he would specifically strengthen it. What will he do then? The young man replied that then the captain would indirectly kill the students, or even deliberately. The young man added that, according to Article 75 of the Moj Criminal Code, this is punishable by imprisonment for a term of 7 years or the death penalty. The captain agreed, and he asked if he would go deal with the students now. Can Yu Shen save them? The men saw that the captain was nervous. Yu Shen stood up and nodded his head. He said that he would not save the students anyway. The captain yelled that the students were his classmates. Does the young man really want to see them die? His thoughts flashed how this guy could be so selfish. The young man replied that he could not cope with the captain. How then can he save them? All that remains is to die with them. Yu Shen suggested another option. You can report it to the police and then receive benefits. The guy continued the conversation. According to Mog's new school policy, if the student dies while completing the task, there is a payment of 30 or 50,000, and if at the same time you become a witness and inform on the murderer, then you can also receive a good reward. Yu Shen was smart. He knew the entire criminal code of Mog. If 10 students are killed, the killer will be issued an arrest warrant. As a particularly dangerous criminal, he will be able to receive a 10. And he asked the captain if he would kill the students. The captain was stunned. He didn't know what to answer. At this time, a stranger stood on a rock with 2 men. God had it. They were bathed in starlight. God was watching them at that moment. If the plan succeeds this time, then perhaps all 3 will have a chance to rise up and become servants of God. This is the greatest mercy. He said that this night these smartest students were destined to die. The men behind him also took up the cry. They shouted that the disciples were destined to die. The man said that let their lives be their payment, and he asked to atone for their sins. We had to wait half an hour and then start. At this time in Baichunshan Mog Division, a man was sitting in the division chief's office. He was writing something. This man was the head of the unit. Suddenly his mobile phone rang. He picked up the phone and answered that it was the boss. On the phone they were talking about some kind of deal. The boss was interested in this and asked to speak further. In fact, this proposal was nothing. I had to do one favor. In 10 minutes a motorcade was supposed to pass from the north, and the guards should not disturb it. Heresy of 1,000 gods. The boss asked to name the price. The voice from the phone said that Chief Lin had organized the certification of students for schools from distant cities, including for the city of Mobay, where certification has not yet been completed. There were only 12 students there. Was it possible? The head of the unit said that a transaction always has a guarantor, and if the one who spoke into the phone continued to fuss, then he would have no choice. The voice on the phone said that this was a deal and that it was a game reserve. The boss has no right to bargain. Of course, if Moj, full of hypocrisy, allows the poor children to die, then there will be nothing to object to. The boss agreed. He warned that if anyone dies in Mob, he was already holding the phone in his hands. The boss said that in 6 months, everyone in Jiangbei province would rise up again and destroy their sect. He promised it. A statement came from the phone. Heresy of 1,000 gods. Meanwhile, in the monitor room, the captain was stunned. He lost a large amount of money. They paid 30,000 for each. He lost as much as 300,000. Yu Shen asked the captain if he could copy this recording for him. The captain did not understand what the guy wanted to do, and he asked him about it. Yu Shen replied that during the certification the answers are unknown. If you mistakenly think that someone is really in danger and save him, you can get a reward. 12 people, a total of 360,000. The captain yelled nervously. He called the young man an impudent man. It wasn't fair to the other students. The captain said that he would definitely report the young man to Moj so that he would be kicked out quickly. After all, the young man is a big parasite. The men behind the captain enthusiastically raised their fingers up and said that it was not for nothing that everyone praised the captain, and they expressed their respect to him. Yu Shen turned around and said that he would give half of it. The captain was very surprised. The captain was delighted. He said that this is a good cooperation and he will sort everything out. Meanwhile, the students continued to confront the monster. Zhao asked if Du Shu was still holding up. The guy replied that everything was fine. He thought about how Yu Shen had predicted everything and always carried a knife with him. If only one of them had any weapons, they would definitely have dealt with the monster. No one knew where Yu Shen had disappeared to. Zhao said that if he came back now, he would call him father. At that moment, footsteps were heard. The guys were surprised. As soon as they talked about this, Yu Shen entered the room. He stood behind the monster. Zhao had to keep his promise and call him dad. Yu Sheng said that it doesn't suit him very well. Zhao asked where the young man had been. Yu Sheng replied that he was in the toilet. Zhao accused the young man of lying. He was sure that these sounds were impossible not to hear. Yu Shen apologized. He was always bad at lying. The guys were outraged. Yu Shen calmly walked around the monster and headed towards the students. Du Shu was surprised if he really just walked by and didn't even glance at the hellhound. And he added that he doesn't know why, but they all need to be together. It will be safer for everyone. Yu Shen thought about it. The young man asked if he could hurt them. The guys didn't understand what he was talking about. Suddenly Zhao clutched his heart and fell to his knees. He moaned. He was in great pain. The boys looked at their classmate. At that same second, Du Shu fell to the floor and began to squirm in pain. He also groaned and shouted that he was in great pain. At the same time, the young man held his back. Yu Shen looked up. He said, "It turns out that here such a fierce demon is bullying his comrades. They are the youth of Moj. They fight for the people. They swear with their lives to protect." The young man did not have time to finish. The monster rushed straight at Yu Shen. The men watched the young man and the monster through the monitor. The cameras not only broadcast video, they also transmitted sound. Therefore, what was happening in the room was listened to by the men from the monitor room. Yu Shen spoke well. If Mog heard this, he would definitely be moved and send money. If you think rationally, then there is nothing terrible. They looked at the monitor. The captain said he was wrong in putting the hound under the control of this fellow, and the fact that it provided him with more room for maneuver. Further, Yu Shen is unlikely to cooperate with the captain. One of the men who stood near the captain was surprised and pointed to the monitor. He asked the captain to look at the screen, and he pointed at the screen with his finger. At this moment, Yu Shen shouted that protecting his comrade was his sacred duty, and the fact that the torch of people will not go out. With one blow, he knocked out the hound. The dog fell on its back. She was dead. The captain's eyes widened in surprise. He watched this game. Yu Shen said that it turns out that such a fierce demon attacked his comrades here, and if he had not come on time... Zhao continued to writhe in pain. The captain was terribly upset. He called Yu Shen an asshole. He said that he was clearly overacting and no one would believe him. He also shouted so that the young man would not deprive the captain of freebies. Yu Shen turned his attention to the cameras that hung above the window. All the students gathered around the lifeless dog. Zhao asked if this was the end. The thought flashed through the students' heads that they were all students here. Why then is there such a gap between them? It turns out they are truly useless. Zhao and Du Shu fought desperately, and it was Yu Shen who defeated the monster. Suddenly the door to the room opened. A man stood on the threshold. He stood with his back to the moonlight. It was hard to make out who it was. The man exclaimed that the gods were all with him. The students looked at the stranger in surprise. The stranger shouted that he was giving new souls to the gods. He raised his hands up and a bowl appeared above him. Zhao asked in surprise whether this was a first-level awakened one. Someone said maybe it's the heretic. But where could he come from here? The man stood with his hand raised. The bowl continued to spin above him. Zhao said that heretics kill mercilessly. Zhao continued that a level 1 awakened one is slightly stronger than a hellhound. And now their only hope. And all the students, as if by agreement, looked at Yu Shen. Zhao grabbed his head. He said that his wound was still very painful. And he added that they are smart, and therefore they should act smarter. Yu Shen exclaimed that it was against the law to kill people. The man shouted first and ran towards the students. He wanted to cover Yu Shen with the bowl, but the young man jumped, and the bowl sank to the floor. The stranger said that the young man had good skills and the gods would like it. It was the heretic. For a minute it seemed to him that the young man had simply disappeared. Yu Shen had already pointed his crossbow at the man, but then I remembered the ban on murder, and he immediately lowered his crossbow. The stranger turned his attention away from Yu Shen and ran up to the other students. He said that he would kill them first. The stranger raised the cup and said that the gods are with him and their radiance is eternal. At that moment, the young man jumped on the stranger from behind. He wanted to hit him with a sharpened piece of metal, but stopped. This would be wrong because the young man could not kill. And he slashed the stranger's hand. Blood poured out of his hand. The man repeated that the gods are with him and their radiance is eternal. He forcefully threw Yu Shen away from him. The guy flew into the distance. Yu Shen did not take his eyes off the stranger, and he was already very close and tried to cover the boy with the cup and die with a cry. The stranger began to catch Yu Shen with the bowl. The guy pulled away, dodged, did somersaults. He tried in every way to escape the cup. The man watched on the monitor. He said that heresy had somehow returned, and he turned to Liu Yun. The man said that during the certification, an incident occurred and the heretic appeared. This had to be dealt with immediately. The captain was horrified when he saw the heretic on the monitor screen. The heretic again headed towards Yu Shen. The young man heard the voice of his class teacher. The teacher shouted that killing the heretic was permitted. The teacher carefully watched the progress of the competition. This boy was inimitable. The teacher once again shouted loudly that the murder of the heretic is not prohibited by law. On the contrary, the one who manages to kill him will receive a reward of 100,000. Yu Shen heard the teacher and held the sharpened iron in his hand. He rushed towards the heretic. He grabbed the heretic by the hand and held it, preventing him from lowering the cup. With his second hand, in which he held a sharpened piece of iron, he swung it, and with a quick movement he slashed it across the throat. The heretic immediately fell to the floor. The disciples shouted that he had killed him, and that the certification is somehow strange. Everyone thought Yu Shen was very cruel. The young man asked what the law the teacher told him about was why he had not seen it before. The teacher repeated that only those who are truly awakened can understand the rules. Duxiang exclaimed in surprise that Yu Shen has now taken the life of a man. The teacher understood. The disciples were horrified because it was the first time they saw a dead person. Everyone thought Yu Shen was very cruel, but why did they themselves volunteer to be awakened and decide to kill? The teacher continued that if Yu Shen had not killed the heretic, everyone in the room would have died. The teacher said that he would gladly look at each student at the moment when one day they will disappoint everyone. The teacher spoke further. He invited the students standing next to the corpse to look at it carefully. Look at his wounds as well as his eyes. They had to face the fear that would help each of them win. Zhao said that he is not afraid at all. His father is the head of the security department. Duxiang said that if Zhao is not afraid, then he is not afraid either. Several students stood and could not say that they were not afraid. They were scared, very scared. The teacher said that the best outcome for them would be to remain ordinary people, and he said that tomorrow they would go back to school and live their old lives. The teacher turned his head to Yu Shen and asked him to follow him. They went outside. They walked slowly and talked. The teacher asked if the guy had killed before. After all, it was clear that he had experience. The young man said yes. The teacher asked another question the first time he did this. Yu Shen replied that it was around the age of 5, 6 years. The teacher looked at the guy and called him a kid. The young man said after thinking for a second, "In a crime-ridden city, killing is not prohibited. This is par for the course." The teacher replied that among all the students he had met, Yu Shen was the best. A little more, and with his talents the young man can become invincible. The teacher lit a cigarette and spoke to the young man. He didn't want to comment on his future, but as a teacher he hoped he had a good heart. He asked his student, no matter what happened, not to point the weapon at people. Yu Sheng said that he will try, but there is one thing. The teacher looked questioningly at the student. Yu Shen continued. Today he decided to fight for what is right and receive the Moj Award. The teacher said that they ate after he saved the people. Moj will not give him money, then the teacher himself will give him the money. Yu Shen took out his blade. The teacher asked what he was going to do. The guy replied, "Is evil spirits really not valued?" He wanted to butcher the murdered heretic and sell him. The teacher said that those who have recently transformed are cheap and their meat is bitter. It would be better to leave this idea. The young man believed the words of the teacher. The young man walked back to the room. At that moment, a man from the ministry approached the teacher. He told the teacher that he had resolved a small misunderstanding. The teacher asked if he could rely on the man from the ministry, since they were old acquaintances. The man from the ministry said that there was no need to debug the reward for Yu Sheng's certification, otherwise the guy would be furious. If he also finds out that his teacher took the reward, the teacher agreed that he shouldn't delay the payment, otherwise in a few years the young man might come and kill his teacher. The young man wandered around the factory. He saw the monitor room door. I decided to go in and chat with the captain. The captain knew that the young man would come. He was waiting for him. And as soon as Yu Shen opened the door, the captain kindly invited him to come through. He invited the young man to meet. After all, the last time the young man was in this room, the captain never introduced himself. His name was Wang Wenshuan. He exclaimed joyfully that today they had solved everything. The captain revealed that Yu Shen actually saved 2 people. He suggested trimming the video recording. As a result, you can get a double reward. Yu Shen did not agree with the captain. He knew it couldn't be counted. Yu Shen believed that the captain's job was to protect the students. Trimming for money goes against the rules, and those who do not follow the established rules die very soon. After the words were spoken, the captain's face became serious. He didn't think that Yu Sheng had a thing for honesty. This surprised him very much. The captain said okay. And he added that if ever they had to work together again, the young man would just have to call, because the captain was now his eternal patron. And whoever stands in his way to wealth will die. Yu Shen added that he had already repeated the same speech many times. Killing people outside the crime city is illegal, and if the captain even thinks about murder, Yu Shen will report him to Moj. The captain laughed. He was no longer so decisive. Yu Shen decided that he would then think about who would be better to work with. After all, The third paragraph of the Code of the Criminal City says that you should never get close to idiots, and it doesn't matter at all whether they are your friends or enemies. It was already dawn outside. The plant no longer looked as gloomy as it did at night. In the room around the body of the heretic, students were sitting. They examined him, looked fear in the eyes, assessed his wounds. They did everything the teacher told them. The captain came through the door. He was also a part-time school bus driver. The students were delighted. They were happy that they would finally go home. The students got on the bus. Someone elbowed Yu Shen. It was Zhao. He said that when they return home, he will definitely help Yu Shen with that matter. The young man did not immediately understand what business Zhao was talking about. Yu Shen remembered after thinking for a while. He asked Zhao to extend his father's prison term. He said, "Okay, buddy." Zhao was happy that Shen allowed him to do this. Suddenly, someone grabbed Shen by the shoulder. It was Du Shu. He said that he wanted to go to Yu Shen, and he asked me to teach him how to kill. Shen thought about it. All the students had good hearts. Why they all want to kill? This question was a mystery to him. After all, this is illegal. Yu Sheng thought that the people from the criminal city were friendlier than those who were currently surrounding him. After all, so little time has passed, and the disciples are already talking about murder. Du Shu said that his language was so-so, and that was not what he meant at all. He just wanted to become stronger. He thought Yu Shen could help him become as strong as himself. Yu Shen replied that you can go bald and become as strong as him. The students arrived at their school. As soon as Yu Shen got off the bus, the captain caught up with him. The captain asked the young man whether they had a good time during the certification. Could this be called a vacation? Probably not. Yu Sheng replied that he just got off the bus. The captain said that he was not in a hurry. He was not in a hurry at all. Yu Sheng walked to the director's office, grabbed the handle and opened the door. Before he could even go inside, he blurted out that he had completed the task. The captain stood behind him. The director said that he had already heard this, but the certification results have not yet arrived. There is no specific list yet, and if this is a deal, then you need to wait until everything becomes clear. Yu Shen turned to the captain and asked, in his opinion, what place he is in. The captain enthusiastically replied that naturally he was first. After all, only he was able to defeat both the Hellhound and the heretic, and therefore he is worthy of respect and reward. The young man turned to the director and said that now he was in first place. The director was confused. He thought why he was asking a complete stranger about the certification results, which the director personally did not even know and had never seen. The director apologized. He asked who the man was who came with Yu Shen to his office. The young man replied that this man was most likely from the province, and he probably decides everything at this certification. The director realized that this man was from the provincial ministry. He joyfully gave his hand to the captain and began to apologize. The director was not even surprised that the young man was from the ministry. After all, the captain was young, promising, and simply handsome. The captain was somewhat embarrassed by the director's words. The director said upsetly that their place had practically no prospects. There is no money, no resources. All that remains is to watch talent. Because they lack nothing, and everyone lives very modestly, to the best of their ability. The director asked which department such a high-ranking person was from. He ordered his secretary to quickly bring tea. The captain thought for a second, and replied that he was from the reserve. By this time, the girl had already brought the man freshly brewed tea. The director narrowed his eyes. He was surprised that the man was from the reserve, and he immediately took the tea from the man. The director walked away with the tea. The captain and secretary looked at each other in surprise. The director walked up to his seat. He put his hand on the chair and, pushing it aside, sat down. He asked why the man had not said earlier that he was from the reserve. Yu Sheng was not interested in the conversation between the director and the captain. He extended his hand and asked to give him what was promised. The director handed him several turquoise crystals. Yu Shen took the stones and squeezed them in his hand. Having received what was promised, he immediately left the director's office. The captain followed the young man. Suddenly, a mobile phone rang in my pocket. Yu Sheng picked up the phone and answered. Zhao called him. He called Shen his brother and said that his father was a very cool guy. Zhao went to see Father Shen today. But when he came to prison, his father was not in the cell. He sat and told fortunes by the hand of one policewoman. It was very enviable. Yu Shen tried to answer something to his friend, but he cut him off mid-word. Zhao continued. Since he considered himself very smart, under his leadership, his father's crime was successfully reclassified as committing indecent acts towards the female sex. With such a crime, he faced a long sentence, and he won't be able to be released very soon. Yu Shen was overjoyed, wondering if his father would spend his whole life behind bars. The captain and Yu Shen came to the main hall of the secret ministry. There were a lot of people here. The captain asked to take a look because it was a unit of the secret ministry. The captain asked the young man if it impressed him. The captain asked the young man if he would photograph something here. Girls sat at tables and received visitors. The girl saw the captain in the room and was very surprised. She couldn't understand how he ended up here. The girl quickly grabbed the phone and called someone back. She said that Wang Wenruan, the sick Wang, came to their ministry again. At that very moment, an emergency was declared. The girls began to lower the blinds. At their workplaces, they installed signs that the reception of citizens was temporarily suspended. The visitors were outraged because just a few seconds ago the ministry was working, and now it's closed. Visitors were wondering why they closed. The captain and student watched in surprise at the situation that had developed. Yu Shen knew that talkers could not be trusted under any circumstances. The crime city taught him this, since they are very talkative and will blurt out at the most inopportune moment. A young girl approached the reception table. She apologized and asked if she could contact the girl from the ministry. She said that their captain went on a mission. Many wounded are now in the hospital. They are even ready to give a reward for his salvation. It was clear that the girl was very excited because she spoke in a raised tone. The worker asked not to panic, but to tell in detail what happened to the captain. It was necessary to figure everything out. And for this, you need to know the situation in more detail. The girl continued that they are now fighting heresy and are giving a reward for saving people. The girl had already started crying. If their captain dies, no one will survive. He fights for the human race. The girl worker raised her hand and said that we needed to wait a little. She will have to check their policies. She put a book on the table, political treatise, and she began to quickly flip through the pages. She found the chapter she needed. Indeed, there is such a rule, but during a war, anyone who has time must record a video. The girl handed the flash drive to the worker. The worker was delighted and picked up the flash drive. She quickly connected it to her computer and opened it to view the contents. The flash drive contained a video of 3 armed men running towards one. A fight ensued. Men with cuts, bruises, and bumps left the scene of the fight, and one man sat with his head bowed near the wall. The girl was already crying. She asked for help with a task, to delay time, otherwise the captain will really die. The girl worker explained to the upset visitor that no matter how much she wanted it, she did not have such rights. Suddenly the girl rose from her chair. She asked to wait and ran after the leader. The captain was surprised. He didn't know that this was possible either, and said that this crazy woman had an idea. They are professionals, but they themselves made a mistake while working together. The captain decided to take a risk because there is nothing you can do for money. He began to ruffle and tear his hair with his hands, and he ran to the workers. He asked to save their captain too. After all, he had information that their captain would also die. There was practically nothing left of him. No arms, no legs, only the head remained. He asked the employees to give him a letter of recommendation. Otherwise, she will kill the guard commander Bui Chun-cheng, an officer in reserve. He asked for help, and tears flowed from his eyes in streams. Xian Fan looked at his captain in surprise. Suddenly, the figure of a man appeared behind the captain. The captain was surprised. A tall man was standing right behind him. His eyes glowed red. Yu Shen warned the captain that standing behind him was the very person the captain was talking about a couple of seconds ago. The captain's face was surprised. He started screaming in delight. That his captain is brave and powerful. He can kill evil spirits at a distance of 10 steps. But at 1,000 steps around him, there will be no one left at all. Could he really die? The girl worker said that the captain is an idiot and he is next in line. The captain asked if, according to the worker, he could survive with only his head. The captain turned to his captain, whom he had summoned. It was lucky that he appeared at that very moment. They looked at each other in silence. The bus driver grabbed the man's arm. He wanted to explain everything to him. He began to tell the man something in the ear. It was clear that he was talking about the exploits of Yu Shen. The man clarified incredulously. Is this guy as cool as the bus driver says he is? The captain was ready to sign every word he said. The tall man looked at Yu Sheng suspiciously. Somehow he didn't immediately believe that he was rich. The man approached the young man, greeted him, and extended his hand to him. His names were Sen and Mo. The man's name was very elegant. Sen Yimo said that he was not used to talking a lot. But if someone offends Yu Shen and Bai Chuncheng, he asked him to inform him. He will be able to explain everything clearly to the offenders. Yu Shen replied that he doesn't really like fighting. What he likes most in the world is money. The man was delighted and hit his chest with his hand. He asked to relax and look at him. He said that he was giving his head to be cut off, that today he would receive the money. To Yu Sheng, the man seemed more and more suspicious. The man said that now it was his turn. and approached the girl who was standing at the table. He said that now it was his turn, and he would definitely succeed. The girl looked in surprise at the man in black. She hoped that he would not interfere with her and would not spoil anything. A worker appeared in the room. She found a leader, and now they went together to the girl to sort out the situation. The man in black quickly approached the manager and pushed the girl aside with his shoulder. He said that at first he and what most likely they had already heard from his subordinate, that all that was left of him was his head, and he would soon die. The leader looked at the man. The thought was spinning in his head that this was a hero of the war with demons, but almost every day he beats his thumbs. The manager asked me to wait while he sorted it out. He asked about the girl who was standing next to the man. The worker replied that this was exactly the girl for whom the worker followed the manager. The leader said that such a talented old and young generation had gathered here at the same time. He turned to the worker. He realized that the girl had only recently arrived and did not know these faces. He asked to remember these persons and to blacklist everyone, because they are scammers. The girl worker understood everything. The manager said that they could not complete a single task, but the man didn't wonder. He shouted that this was nonsense. After that, the man hugged Yu Shen's shoulder. He asked the manager if he knew this guy. The manager had never seen this guy before. He asked who he was. The man introduced himself. He is Chen and Mo, a reserve officer and guard commander of Jiangbei province, who has awakened 6 times. Compared to this, his status is higher. He introduced Yu Sheng as his good friend. He said that the guy shed blood for the sake of humanity. For the sake of humanity, he killed evil spirits. The leader looked carefully at the young man. The leader replied that if he indulged these impudent people every day, he would rob Moj. No, he did not agree to this. The man shouted that now everyone would see what he could do with him. The leader and the man were already ready to fight, but they were interrupted by Yu Shen. He coughed, trying to attract attention to himself. He wanted to say a few words. Yu Shen raised his index finger and began his speech. According to the Moj Criminal Code, Chapter Awakened, Article 9, fighting in the city without any reason is punishable by 15 days imprisonment and a fine of 10,000 yuan. Whoever has a greater effect will be punished by imprisonment for more than 6 months and a fine of 100,000 yen for violating public order. The man was upset. 100,000 was not his order. Yu Shen was ready to apply for the task. But if for some reason the manager delays or does not accept it, then, according to Article 32 of the Law on the Protection of Rights, he will have the right to guarantee his legitimate interests. Yu Shen sat down next to the girl and said that he was carrying out a task. The captain stood aside. They did not understand what was happening to the young man. Is he sane now? Yu Shen mentioned the video. At this moment, the manager turned to the girl worker. He didn't understand why he should be given the task. The girl carefully looked at the video of Yu Shen fighting the heretic. Suddenly the girl said that there was a visible edit in the video. Yu Shen didn't mind. The video was actually edited, but it was easy to invite a specialist to analyze the situation because the forces were completely unequal. Yu Shen repeated that if not for his help, the disciples would have lost this fight. Suddenly, the manager ordered him to be let through and the entire reward given out according to the standard. The girl understood everything. The girl smiled and told the young man that the application had been submitted for consideration. Within 3 working days, the money will be credited to the young man's account. Yu Shen thanked. He was interested to know the reason. The leader asked the young man if he was thinking about working in the secret ministry. Yu Shen replied that he had no such plans yet. The manager introduced himself. He said his name was Lin, and he works as an assistant to the minister of Moje, Jiangbei province. He asked the guy to trust him, and after he entered the secret ministry, his career would not end. The leader handed a piece of paper to the young man. Here a man in uniform joined the conversation. He said that the manager wouldn't even think about it. After all, he knew his intentions. After all, he was a reserve officer for so many years. The leader turned around and walked away. The officer just chuckled indignantly. The officer told Yu Sheng that this time was an accident. He asked not to doubt his strength. He asked me to find him when Yu Shen had money. The bus driver wanted to talk about money, but a man in uniform pulled him by the shoulder and asked him to leave. The captains headed towards the exit from the room. Yu Shen remained sitting on a chair near the table. The officer said that it was a lot of impudence in this situation to want money. Yu Shen then headed to school. Zhao met him on the school grounds. He shouted his name enthusiastically. Zhao was very happy that Yu Shen returned. After all, while he was away, the entire management of the school changed. It was their school that won the certification. The other 2 schools disagreed, and there were riots every day. Zhao said that if Yu Shen returned, then everything would be fine, and they will definitely solve everything together. Zhao had tears of joy in her eyes. Yu Shen asked if he was ready for this. Zhao chuckled and said nothing. He also told Shen that the teacher was looking for him. He is now in the breakfast cafe opposite the school. Yu Shen wondered why the teacher was looking for him. He went to the cafe opposite to meet the teacher. The teacher was sitting at the table. The waiter came to his table to take his order. Yu Shen approached and asked why the teacher needed him. The teacher asked to look at the waiter who worked in this cafe. Yu Shen said that this was not the first time he had seen this young man. He heard that his classmates called this guy Lame Wang. The teacher asked how the guy looked at him, and he raised a glass of coffee to his lips. Yu Shen said he looked with his eyes. The teacher said that this was true, and there was no need to ask him such a question. The teacher began to talk about the waiter. This young man was once a reserve officer. I underwent training for 2 years. Then, due to the fact that the summary data was not enough, he went to the Dawn outpost. On the 3rd day, evil spirits attacked him at night and broke his leg. He had no other choice but to return back here. That's how it happens. You can train for 2 years but not spend 3 days in war. The teacher only wanted to tell Yu Shen this. After all, for people now, everything is not so rosy. The teacher talked and slowly drank his drink. The teacher emphasized that war is cruel. He asked if Lame Wang had been attacked by evil spirits in front of Yu Shen, would he have saved him? Yu Shen replied that he didn't know yet. The teacher said that he once saw with his own eyes how a rescued person pointed a knife at his savior. I also saw that 3 lives were given because of 1 bun stained with blood. The teacher stood up from the table and said that perhaps it was not worth forcing him, because the world had never protected Yu Shen. The teacher put his hand on the young man's shoulder. And why does he force the young man to go and protect this world? The teacher thought about it. At this time, Yu Shen held a sharpened piece of metal in his hand at the ready. The teacher removed his hands from Yu Shen and suggested we talk about something else. The teacher lit a cigarette and asked if Yu Shen had any friends. The young man replied that there is. This is his girlfriend, and she is now in a crime city. But in 307 days she will leave there. The teacher asked if someone would hunt this girl. What will Yu Shen do in such a situation? The young man said that he would kill everyone who hunted her. What if the whole world is hunting this girl? Yu Shen replied that then he would be forced to kill the entire world. The teacher turned his attention back to the waiter. He did the same, only he protected the whole world. The young man was surprised. He defended the whole world, and Yu Shen was going to kill the whole world. By this time, the teacher had already finished smoking his cigarette and threw away the butt. The teacher invited Yu Shen to go with him to the same place. Before leaving, the teacher trampled the cigarette butt with his foot. They came to the veterans' camp. There were a lot of people here. Some were without legs. A man came out to meet them. He said that the teacher considers this place a zoo, but despite this, he periodically comes here. He asked the teacher who he brought to the veterans' camp this time. The teacher replied that his student had come with him. The man had a disc peeking out of his pocket. There was a picture of a naked girl on the box. Yu Shen immediately noticed this disc. The man said that the student looked good. Yu Shen bent down and spoke directly into the man's ear. According to the Moj criminal code, public sale of illegal video material is punishable by 15 days of arrest and a fine of 2,000 yuan. The man did not immediately understand what the student meant. Yu Shen showed the man 3 fingers and asked whether that number would be enough or not. The teacher wanted to invite the student with him, but the man replied that he wanted to talk to the student a little more. The man said that 30 is a lot. The young man replied that this did not mean 30, but 300. The man was indignant. He called the student a brat. He said that he only bought 2 pieces. He wanted to earn some money. He raised his finger menacingly. Yu Shen knew exactly the place where such discs were sold. He cleared his throat and said that these CDs were sold in the north of Mobay at Brown's Music. And he added that this store sells 1 disc for 1 yuan. So if you think about it, this man still has 800 left of what he earned. The man began to shake with anger. It was clear from his hands that the man was seriously nervous. The man shouted that 200 was the maximum he could offer. And if Yu Shen does not agree, then he will tell Xiao Liu that he has absolutely no shame. Yu Shen took out his phone at this time. Yu Shen continued. He said that if he snitched on this man in the right place, he could get 5,000. The man snatched the phone from the young man's hands. He pressed him to his chest and said that with scammers, you can only deceive, and there is no need to drag bureaucrats into this. The man just wanted to earn money for his funeral, and he still has a conscience. At the same time, the phone continued to ring. He did not reset the incoming call. Someone's voice was heard on the phone. The voice apologized and asked if it was really Zhang Yushu on the phone. The man yelled that they made the wrong call, and he was just showing off. How does he know the great hero Zhang Yushu? At the same time, the man quickly pressed the end call button. After the man calmed down a little, He replied that he agreed to 300, but they didn't even negotiate. Yu Shen doesn't take this seriously at all. The man continued to hold the phone in his hands. At the same time, the young man took the man's hand. The man replied that he was a hero. After all, he guarded and pacified demons for 30 years, shed blood for the sake of people. After these words, the man took money out of his pocket. He handed them to Yu Sheng. The young man took the money. Yu Shen's teacher watched their conversation. He stood a little away from them. The teacher decided that Old Man Zhang really liked Yu Shen. After receiving the money, Old Man Zhang and Yu Shen went to the teacher. The man told the teacher that he had taught his student very well. The teacher thanked Old Man Zhang and said that he would try harder in the future. Old Man Zhang thought that everyone in stock, without exception, was an idiot, and he didn't listen to him at all. Yu Shen thought about it. He gave Old Man Zhang some advice. In fact, you can change your management model a little, change the contents of the discs to an anti-fraud one, then there will be no need to worry. And after that, it will be possible to compete and make propaganda against fraud. Old Man Zhang was surprised. This guy knows a little about business. The man asked Yu Shen whether he had already awakened or not yet. The young man replied that this should happen this week. Old Man Zhang was very curious about exactly how many patterns Yu Shen had revealed, but the guy remained silent. He didn't want to tell. The man turned his back to Yu Shen and his teacher and began to walk away. Finally, he said that the young man is indifferent. He is very cautious. You need to learn to trust others. The teacher and Yu Shen continued on their way. They approached the trees where there were several graves. Another hole was dug next to them. The teacher said that Old Man Zhang's wife, son, and parents were buried here. Yu Shen looked questioningly at the last hole dug. The teacher said that the last empty grave was for himself. He lives alone, and under him there have been 2 rulers of evil spirits. The teacher said that people actually live differently, and he doesn't tell Yu Shen to leave today at all. That's not true. Only the human race needs those who have enough strength to protect them. The teacher said that he really hoped that Yu Shen would become that person, and he affectionately stroked the young man's head. Yu Sheng was alarmed by such actions from the teacher. It was clear that he clenched his fists tightly. The teacher also noticed this. He was surprised that the guy did not take out the blade this time. This indicated that the guy was beginning to trust his teacher. The teacher said that a crime city is just a crime city, and the world is very huge, and Yu Shen must hear, see, feel it. The teacher fixed his gaze on the sky. The young man also looked into the clouds. Old Man Zhang asked not to play with feelings and get out of here quickly. After all, this was his family crypt, not a zoo. The young man and the teacher were surprised. At this time, at the ministry, a man in a robe was talking on the phone. He asked the divine servant to speed up the plan. He said that the last operation in Jiangbei province was too big. Even the Ministry of Exorcism joined in the purge. They suffered serious losses. The man continued to talk to the divine servant. After all, during the certification process, Jiangbei is guarded the most. And if they decide to take action, it could have a big impact on their plan. The man in the cloak replied that he had no more questions, asked the divine servant for forgiveness, and hung up. Since the divine servant was personally involved in this matter, he was sure to know the plan according to which to act. We can conclude that he does not require advisors in this matter. Yu Shen stood in the director's office. Before his eyes was the same scroll, which periodically appeared to him. In the scroll, Yu Shen read that his awakened item was a stick. At the same time, strength tripled, speed doubled, and combat effectiveness increased 10 times. Then you just need to strengthen the weak points. The director snapped his fingers and returned the student to the office, who at the moment was somewhere far away with his thoughts. The director asked, "In the final exam, is there a guarantee that the results will be moved up 10 positions?" Yu Sheng didn't know whether he had such guarantees or not. The director said there was no need to bargain. Yu Shen looked at the director, and there was a thought in his head that according to the rules of the criminal city, you shouldn't be very confident if you don't know all the information. Otherwise, you won't be able to complete the task. The principal said that earlier the threshold was 100. For each promotion in the list, the principal will give a certain amount to the student, and he thought for a minute what amount would be more suitable. The director decided after some thought that he will give the student 100, and as soon as they reach first place, he will receive 10,000. Yu Shen turned around sharply, said goodbye to the director, and was about to leave his office. The director jumped up from his chair and asked the young man to wait. The director stood in front of the door and did not want to let Yu Shen out of his office until they came to a final decision that would suit both of them. The director said that he had a dispute with the head of the education department, and if they rise to third place in the regional list, they will allocate funds to them. Then the director and Yu Shen will be able to divide them 70 to 30. and he asked how Yu Shen felt about this. The young man thought about it. Yu Shen said that climbing up the list and getting a reward is certainly a good thing. But doesn't the director want to earn much more than this remuneration? The director thought about it. The director stood in front of the door, thereby blocking the student's exit. At this, Yu Shen turned around and walked back to the director's desk. He suggested that the director improve his plan. 3 students together can design a school uniform. The director needs to send his approval to management, then advertise on this form. Students from their school will take good places, after which they will give interviews in uniform. At the same time, they will become, so to speak, walking advertising posters. As a result, their school will achieve glory, and they will be happy to spend money on school uniforms. The director was very surprised, because it was the Bible for making money. Yu Shen, in the eyes of the director, was an incredibly smart and intelligent young man. The director asked to trust him and not to worry at all, because the head of the education department, Mobe, was his good old friend from the war. And it is within the power of the director to arrange everything as suggested by the student. Yu Shen asked the director if he was a reserve officer. The director said yes, he is a reserve officer. He did not understand why the student needed this information. Yu Shen decided that if the director is a reserve officer, then he shouldn't be trusted. He remembered old man Zhang's words that only idiots come out of the reserve. In the director's office, the conversation continued. Yu Shen asked about the method of dividing the money received. The director said that the division is very simple. Yu Shen will be allocated 60, and that is quite generous. Yu Shen thought about the director's words. He did not agree with this outcome. The director realized this and shouted to the whole office that he agreed to give the young man 70 and keep only 30 for himself. It is necessary to add to this the reputation of the school, because only geniuses come out of here. The director could not offer less because his connections also cost money. This result satisfied Yu Shen. They agreed. The director ran to his desk. He said, "Okay, just need to put a stamp on the contract," so that it would be written in black and white that the deal was completed not in words, but in documents. Yu Shen said that there is no need for an agreement. He recorded the entire conversation on a tape recorder. After this, the young man left, knocking the door loudly. The director thought about it. He just wanted money. Is it possible that Yu Shen, having this recording, will be able to report the director to higher authorities? A week has passed. Yu Shen stood in the office and examined the jacket. There were a lot of labels on the back of the jacket. Data about partners, the skills they had, and additional useful information. The director really generalized, the student thought. Before the exam, Yu Shen and Zhao were in the gym. They fought. Zhao begged Yu Shen not to hit him. Zhao's face was already broken and blood was flowing from his nose. He begged Yu Shen to beat him at least more slowly, allowing him to come to his senses. Yu Shen swung again. Zhao braced himself for the blow and narrowed his eyes. At that moment, the blow hit the bag. Zhao held the pair in front of him. Zhao was outraged. He knew that Yu Shen was kind, but it was worth saying that he was in great pain. Du Shu watched the fight. The young man knew that he transferred to this school for a reason. He too must increase his combat effectiveness. At this moment, Yu Shen grabbed Zhao's leg and slammed him to the floor. He tossed Zhao from one side to the other. Zhao yelled at the entire gym. Du Shu could no longer watch this fight. He said that for the sake of the exam, he could intervene and rushed forward to the guys. Zhao was foaming at the mouth, and Yu Shen continued to pull him by the collar of his shirt. Yu Shen finally finished. The bloody bodies of Zhao and Du Shu lay on the floor. Yu Shen went outside and stood under the wall of the school. At that moment, a teacher was passing near the gym. He asked Yu Shen what he wanted. The young man thought this. If he needs to fight during the exam, he doesn't know what to do in this case. He didn't want to do this. The teacher asked in this case whether he would shoot past or whether he would dull his blade. Yu Shen said that he would not do this because it is impossible to deliberately damage the weapon. The young man asked the teacher why it is forbidden to kill people here and who sets these rules. The teacher laughed, and once again he touched Yu Shen's head. The teacher watched the young man's hands. Yu Shen stood at the same time. His hands were in his pockets. The teacher asked if Yu Shen remembered that veteran in the cafe. The teacher's hand was on Yu Shen's head. The young man replied that he remembered. The teacher said that tomorrow he would also go to a camp for veterans, because his only son also went to the reserve. The teacher said that Moge has been pushing him all the time lately. They say that the time has come and he had no children. Therefore, in the near future, he will have to go to a camp for veterans. But the teacher can enter Yu Shen as his student, and this is considered a child, and this will allow him to stay. Yu Shen agreed with the teacher. The teacher looked intently into the student's eyes. The teacher smiled at the student. They continued to stand opposite each other. Teacher and Yushen approached the city gate of Mobei. The place was busy with a lot of people walking around. The teacher asked the student to think carefully. After all, he had practically no character problems. They approached the table. The young man sitting at the table had to fill out a questionnaire, and to do this, know the data. He asked Yushen to give his name, age, identification number, the name of his parent, and also the accompanying person. The student replied that his name was Yushen and he was 18 years old. The young man at the table clarified that the man who accompanies the student is his father. Yusheng replied that his father did not come. The teacher asked to write down his name, Liu Qingfeng. After all, he is his teacher and guardian. The people around were excited and scared. They did not understand what happened and where this explosion came from. The teacher thought that the explosion occurred in the direction where their school was located. Most likely this happened at their school. The man who filled out the form shouted that the heretics had staged a rebellion. Their Moog has already sent people to deal with them. Everyone needed to calm down and get back to their business. The teacher said that Yushen is the first in the province, and the teacher is waiting for him. Yushen raised his hand and energy swirled around him. People ran away in panic. At the same time, the teacher was calm. The man blocked the teacher's path and said that the city was dangerous and he should not go inside. The teacher revealed that he was a Jiangbei reserve officer. He guarded the outpost for pacifying evil spirits for 2 years, and it is his duty to protect the human race. A shining sword appeared behind the teacher's back, and since he is a teacher, it is his duty to protect the students. People crowded around the teacher. The man introduced himself as a reserve officer of Jiangbei Division 305, AD 141, Dawn Outpost. One of the men also introduced himself as a reserve officer of Jiangbei, 309th Division, 145 AD, Demon Outpost. They kept repeating that it was their duty to protect the human race, and they are unconditionally ready to immediately protect people from heretics. The man shouted after the teacher and some other men that it would not be so easy to get through, and he will wait for them here, and also ask them to return with victory. The man thought that earlier, when people were attacked by demons, the defenders stood to the end. Men in raincoats were already approaching the school building. There were many of them. The captain, who was the school bus driver, said that the heretics actually dared to attack the school. He warned everyone present that they needed to act. One of the girls confirmed that we need to act quickly. The girl with the lollipop suggested fighting to the death. It would definitely be faster. There were shouts on the street. They were addressed to the servants of God in the cities of Mobei, Xinhai, and Changchun, and asked to be directed to the true path. The captain said, "Since Moog is not here now, he will lead the troops in his place." And he called to start. He wanted to end the battle in 5 minutes. But those who violate his order, no matter whether he is alive or dead, his head will fly from his shoulders. Suddenly, the captain heard someone speaking to him. The voice said that the boy who had barely joined the reserves was already such an idiot. These words were spoken by the school teacher. There was another officer standing behind the teacher, and he said that he remembered this child. He was beaten every day in the army, and he cried a lot. Now this child has already grown up a lot. The captain was distracted for a minute and laughed. At that moment, the officer knocked the captain down. The captain fell to the floor. The teacher said that if you were distracted for just a second, you could get beaten. And he called the captain a loser. The teacher, holding a sword in his hands, stood in front of the heretics. Behind him stood a group of people. The heretics came very close. The teacher asked everyone to listen to his command. He called for blocking the gates to prevent new victims. He said that he brought people who are capable of protecting the school. The battle has begun. The heretics were armed and strong. This happened in the city, but in the camp it was quiet and calm. At this time, Zhang was fishing and watched the float. The float was periodically touched. Most likely the fish swam to the bait. Footsteps were heard behind him. Someone carefully approached the lake, and someone called him loudly. It was the leader. Old man Zhang shuddered. He was enjoying fishing and didn't expect anyone near the lake to disturb him. He asked what happened, if someone had died, and he said that the leader scared him very much. Zhang sat calmly and held a fishing rod in his hands. He continued to watch the float. There was a feeling that at that moment nothing bothered him at all. The leader approached him with a request. Lin Feng from the 4th generation asked him to return from seclusion. Zhang breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that My Day himself had appeared. He asked the manager to leave because he had absolutely no intention of returning. He felt quiet and calm here, and he did not plan to fight for peace again and protect people from evil spirits. Zhang said that if he appears at the outpost with the level he now has, he will simply be blown away by the wind. He no longer has the strength that he had 10 years ago. He gradually squandered his skill, and he just doesn't want to participate in it. After all, most likely there are younger guys who can protect against evil spirits. The leader begged. He said that since the advent of Qi, the first generation almost completely died. There are very few people left from the second. At the same time, the third generation holds the front very weakly. It is simply necessary in the city. Without him, the outpost of pacifying the evil spirits cannot be resisted. Zhang replied, no matter what happens, he is not ready to participate in it because he is already too old. The manager took out some kind of box. It was small in size and brown in color. He asked and begged respected Zhang to return from seclusion. The leader opened the box he was holding in his hands. There was an orange ball in the box. The ball looked like a pearl. Zhang turned around and looked at what the leader was offering him. He asked if he eats this, his body will become the same as before, and he also said that they really spent money. At the same time, his face brightened noticeably. He was no longer so categorical. This meant that he accepted the idea that he could return to the city. The leader said that Mobei was attacked. At the same time, riots occur in the city itself. If Zhang does not help restore order, he will simply witness the death of people. There is an invasion of heretics in the city. There are a lot of them, and the defenders can't defeat them all. Zhang thought about it. Is the leader really threatening him with the lives of ordinary people? The leader said that he agreed to any of Zhang's conditions. After all, he is fighting for Mobei. He had nothing more to offer. The leader knelt down in front of Zhang. Zhang turned and picked up the box that the leader was holding out to him. He sighed. He simply had no other choice. He should help. This is his responsibility. Zhang turned around. Someone asked him a question. Will their support of the human race return? Behind him stood 3 young men dressed in black cloaks. The young men repeated in one voice. The teaching of 1,000 gods, the servants and protectors of God greet respected Zhang. These were the heretics who attacked Mobei. Zhang was surprised whether heretics were standing in front of him. Bringing these 3 with you is not enough. The heretics replied that this was completely unimportant. And if Zhang eats this medicine, then within 3 days the demons will begin a large-scale battle for the outpost of pacifying evil spirits. Zhang said that the guys were talking nonsense to scare him, and he took the medicine from the box in his hands. At that moment, the flashes started flashing. The heretics carefully watched what Zhang would do. Zhang brought the medicine to his lips and put it in his mouth. He quickly swallowed it. The man didn't even need to drink water. The capsule was small in size. At this moment, the flashes began to flash. A magic spear appeared behind the man's back. This was his secret weapon, which appeared when it was necessary to fight. Zhang felt a surge of strength. As it turned out, he was not that old. The heretic shouted something about the 8th Bodhi, and the fact that this cannot be. Even if Zhang recovers, he still needs the 7th Bodhi. Zhang replied that they tried a lot to hide their spy in Mogi. The heretic was at a loss. He did not understand how Zhang guessed. He narrowed his eyes. Meanwhile, Zhang stood and looked at the heretics. Behind him, the force, which was represented in the form of a hand, took a spear. Zhang answered the heretic that he had talked enough, and it was time for him to say goodbye to this world. The hand began to spin the spear right in front of the heretics. Another second, and the heretics were struck by the spear. Blood splashed in different directions. Some of the heretics had blood flying straight from their mouths. This spectacle was not for the faint of heart. After the battle, Zhang approached the still slightly alive heretic. The heretic lay in a pool of blood and struggled in death convulsions. With the last of his strength, he asked that before he died if Zhang could answer one of his questions. But Zhang replied that he couldn't and he didn't have time to talk to him. The heretic at that very moment said goodbye to life and fell to the ground. His body was already lifeless. Zhang turned to the manager. He ordered to call Chen Mo and tell him to get the nets. The manager didn't seem to understand what he was told. He asked again in surprise. Then Zhang once again asked to just call him, and the manager took out his phone to make a call. The manager dialed the number. He introduced himself as Zhang and asked to take out the nets. The voice on the other end of the line understood everything, as if it had been waiting for this call. Zhang sat down back to the place where he had been fishing before. The manager was outraged that in such a situation the man continued to fish. At the same time, Zhang launched the float through himself. He asked if they all really came out of Lingnian Academy as such idiots. Zhang stood up and began to move away from the lake. As he left, the man waved his hand to the leader, as if inviting him to follow him. Then he called the manager with his voice and said that it was time to settle the score. All those who were in the camp at that time began to cry. They understood that their master Zhang might never return to them, and they were very hurt by this thought. They got used to him and did not want to let their master go. After all, anything could happen to him. The demons were insidious and approaching. On the other hand, only Zhang could protect all the people. Zhang replied that if his old bones could still serve humanity, then it would be worth it. He went off into the distance. The veterans watched their master until he disappeared. Meanwhile, Yu Shen was getting to the exam venue. He walked slowly and was completely calm. In his hands, he held a loaded crossbow. He always felt much calmer when he had some kind of weapon in his hands. When he approached the exam site, he saw several creatures. Outwardly, they looked like wolves. The paws had sharp claws and the body was covered with thick brown fur. After analyzing the appearance of the creatures, he decided that using a crossbow would not be able to kill them. And just then, he thought about the stick. At that moment, a stick appeared in his hands. She came out of nowhere and radiated light. Yu Shen realized that he had awakened, and now this is his secret weapon. At that moment, the monster's eye noticed Yu Shen. The monster jumped and flew straight at the young man. He had long, sharp claws. The mouth was open. White teeth were visible from it. The eyes glowed with turquoise light. The young man was not afraid and was ready to take the blow, because by that moment he had already awakened. Yu Shen held the magic stick tightly in his hands. She also emitted light. He pointed the stick at the monster flying in the air. Yu Shen hit the monster with a stick. The monster felt dizzy. His pupils began to roll around in circles. At that moment, the young man took out his blade and waved it. Yu Shen was always ready for battle and therefore carried with him an entire arsenal of weapons, which he skillfully hid under his clothes. At the moment the monster approached, the young man hit him in the chest with a blade. Scarlet blood flew to the sides. The monster roared. Yu Shen liked this attack. It was very effective. The blade saved him more than once in difficult situations. Yu Shen looked back. There were many monsters in the area. Their eyes sparkled with red light. In the middle of the clearing stood Yu Shen's stick, which emitted light. And the closer the creatures approached her, something strange began to happen to them. Their eyes began to roll. It was a kind of hypnosis. They looked at the stick without taking their eyes off. And they didn't seem to notice the young man behind them. At this moment, Yu Shen pushed off the ground and jumped towards the monsters. He swung his blade around himself. He mercilessly slaughtered the monsters that surrounded him. Blood flew in all directions. Yu Shen fought with them all night. The battle ended at dawn. The bloody bodies of the monsters were scattered at the edge of the forest. There were scarlet bloodstains everywhere on the grass. The young man stopped the moment he made sure that all the animals were dead. He stood at the edge of the forest, holding a blade in one hand. At that moment, a bird flew in. She sat down on a tree not far from Yu Shen. The bird attracted the young man's attention. Another second, and a flock of birds flew straight towards the young man. Yu Shen was ready to attack again. He held the blade at the ready. Yu Shen began to swing the blade around himself. He cut the birds one by one. Yu Shen realized that these were not ordinary birds. Most likely this is another stage of the exam. Blood flew in different directions, and lifeless birds fell to the ground one by one. The man stood on a tree branch and was surprised that the animal spirits had already died. This happened in a very short period of time, just 15 minutes. He couldn't understand how it happened. The man saw everything that happened in the forest on the map. He saw a red dot that was moving. It was Yu Shen. He was surprised because someone was already approaching the finish line. It's incredible that this is the same Yu Shen. How did he do it? The man was very surprised. Is it really possible that after so many years the trouble will finally leave Jiangbei? Yu Shen was in a hurry to get somewhere. He was practically flying above the ground, making his way through the trees in the forest. He wanted to move as quickly as possible and put all his strength into this. Yu Shen wanted to get out. He needed to see something urgently. Suddenly, he stopped. His path was blocked by another monster that looked like a tiger. It was large in size. The young man was ready to fight him too. He held the blade tightly in his hand. Yu Shen thought for a moment. A plan appeared in his head. How to do the right thing and what weapon to use. He quickly opened his jacket, where the needles were attached. Yu Shen instantly snatched them and threw them at the enemy. The needles reached the target, pricked the animal and fell down, but they did not cause much harm to the animal. Such an incident simply made the monster very angry. His eyes were bloodshot. Yu Shen acted further. He was well prepared and had different weapons. After all, it is impossible to understand in advance which weapon will be the most effective in a particular case. He quickly wound the thread around his fingers, making a string like a bow, and now a sharpened arrow flew at high speed straight into the monster. The arrow pierced the monster's neck. This weapon was more effective because blood appeared. The tiger was wounded. He began to growl ferociously in pain. The monster came closer to the young man and waved its paw. Yu Shen jumped and avoided the blow. He held a cable in his hands. At the moment when the monster wanted to attack Yu Shen, the guy wrapped a cable around the animal's neck. The young man flew over the tiger and forcibly tightened the cable with both hands. Blood flew from the monster's mouth. Yu Shen was able to cope with this monster. The lifeless tiger fell to the ground. Another test was over. Yu Sheng was very happy that everything was finally over. He was a little tired from the fights and wanted to rest. Yu Shen was purposeful. He said that when he comes out, he will definitely see his teacher Liu. Will he be alive or dead? The man watched the young man in surprise. Yu Shen was dressed in glow. The man who watched the exam could not believe his eyes. Only 20 minutes, and someone has already managed to get out of the trap. Yu Shen had already arrived at the place and was just standing at the table. He asked the man what place he took. The man replied that he was the first. It is not known exactly whether it is throughout the province or not, but in Mobei, Yu Shen is first. The young man turned around and prepared to leave. The man asked where he wanted to go. Yu Shen replied that he was going to the city. The man blocked the passage with himself and said that it was very dangerous in the city now. At the same time, Yu Shen is injured, and the first thing that needs to be dealt with is this. The young man pointed a loaded crossbow at the man's face. He said that if the man wants to stop him again, he will kill him. The man stood his ground. He said that in this case, Yu Shen would have to kill him, because he cannot allow the young man to enter the city. He is in charge of Yu Shen's life. Yu Shen didn't understand. Is this man really not afraid of death at all? Or he's just pretending and acting out the scene? The young man pulled out a pistol and pointed it at the man. He said he was not ready to pay that price. At that moment, an arrow from a crossbow flew into the ground. Yu Sheng thanked the man for his concern, and he said that he is responsible for his life himself. And once again he asked not to interfere with him, because otherwise he would really have to kill him. At that moment there was a battle with heretics in the city. The girl desperately pushed away the heretics with her foot. The captain also dealt blows to heretics. Blood was flying all around. The girl hit one of the heretics right in the chest with an axe. Blood poured out of his chest like a fountain. The girl was holding a glowing axe in her hands. She killed the heretics one by one, delivering powerful blows. The men fell to the ground from the injuries they received that were incompatible with life. A little further on, the heretics gathered in a heap. You could see someone throwing them around. Men in raincoats were flying from the center in different directions. Everyone rolled up their sleeves and desperately fought against the evil spirits. The young girl mercilessly slaughtered the heretics. Her face was covered in bruises and blood, but she looked brave and courageous. A little further on, the captain and the dark-haired girl were fighting back to back. Everyone was smeared with the blood of heretics. There were a lot of them. It was some kind of invasion. The captain swung a glowing axe, keeping the heretics at a safe distance and not letting them get close to him. But the man in the raincoat got too close. He looked straight into the captain's eyes. The captain waved his axe desperately in front of the heretic's eyes. The man recovered and tried to avoid the blow. Suddenly the man in the cloak dodged and began to fight the captain. The heretic threw the captain to the ground with force. Blood flew from his mouth. Seeing what happened, a dark-haired girl with a sword flew up to this heretic. She raised the weapon high above her and struck. The sword plunged into the heretic's back. He screamed. The captain lay on his back and watched in surprise what was happening. Did he really allow the girl to save him at that moment? The axe lay on the captain's chest. The captain rose to his feet and swung his axe. There were a lot of heretics. They came and came. They climbed like evil spirits. The captain shouted that they would not be able to stop them. The girl hoped that they would be able to protect the students and other civilians who were in the city itself. The heretics raised their heads to him and again uttered their cry. They asked the gods to come with them. The principal and teacher stood on the school grounds. They watched what was happening. The teacher held a huge sword on his shoulder. The men realized that they could not stop the evil spirits at the gate. The teacher said that now their time has come, and they need to hold out at all costs until reinforcements arrive. The heretics began to approach the teacher. The battle has begun. The teacher mercilessly swung his sword and cut down everyone in his path. The heretics groaned and screamed in pain, but continued to advance. The teacher fought desperately against his enemies. They must, no matter what, protect their school, their city of heretics. Splashes of blood flew to the side. Hundreds of students were visible in the windows. They watched what was happening. Their faces radiated surprise, interest, and fear. The director was outside. He saw the students watching what was happening. He said that today the director will teach them an important lesson. Anyone who dares to attack his people will certainly be overtaken by his punishment. The director said that at his age he also passed through the outpost of pacifying evil spirits, and at that second a sword appeared behind his back. The sword glowed red, and its hilt was decorated with blood-red stones. He took this sword in his hands. Now he is definitely ready to confront the evil spirits. He called heretics bastards, and he said that no matter how much they wanted, they would not dare to touch his students. Let it remain only in their dreams. And the director began to bravely wave his sword around. Where the sword passed, there was a blood-red mark. The teacher stood not far from the director and waved his sword. The teacher hasn't had this much fun for a long time. He fought against heretics while continuing to remain joyful and cheerful. The director said that the destruction of the sect is to protect the future of the human race. Everything is the same as 10 years ago. All repeats, and their task is to again withstand the evil spirits. The director quoted the teacher's words about protecting the future of the human race, and he said that it was really funny. One of the sect leaders appeared like a bird. He had his own wings, and in addition, he was supported by a red bird. He said that to cleanse the world of evil and build a new order for people means giving people a new future. The director objected. Their sect did not care about people at all. He is a vile brat. All he knows is to seduce young people. The Birdman raised his hands up. He said that all that was needed was for light to be shed on the earth. And then people will be able to live forever in unity with the gods. And he repeated that the ignorant cannot understand this. He considered the school principal and teacher to be ignorant. At this moment, the teacher joined the conversation. He said that if the leader's words make no sense, then it is necessary to start a battle. The teacher was ready to fight the demon. The leader smiled. He really liked the teacher's straightforwardness. He flapped his wings and flew over the school, intending to fight the teacher. Behind him were streaks of red light. Having flown closer, the leader told the teacher that he had an excellent sword. The teacher replied that his sword was very good. He really likes it too. After all, he helps him fight evil spirits. In addition, the sword has a rather euphonious name, the Devil's Gravedigger. He sent more than a dozen heretics and other evil spirits to the next world. The teacher waved his sword near the leader of the evil spirits. He was ready to attack him. The Birdman mocked. He regretted that many people could die from the sword today. The man ran away from the teacher with lightning speed. He predicted his actions and avoided the blow. The leader began to laugh. It didn't sound like laughter, but like a devilish reproach. He said that eventually divine light would shine on this world. And he called people dirt on its surface. He called on the gods to come with them, and he asked that the divine light would exist forever. He spoke these words again. He asked this from heaven, from the universe. He raised his hands into the sky, pushed off the ground, and flew up. He was heading towards the school building. The teacher watched him carefully. After analyzing the words spoken, the teacher realized that his main goal was the students, and this could not be allowed. As a teacher, he is obliged to protect them. He is responsible for every student who studied at their school. The teacher followed the flying leader with his gaze, and he asked that it be given to him. He personally wanted to deal with this leader. The teacher raised his sword high. At that moment, the leader was just flying over the teacher. The teacher sat down a little. He wanted to gain momentum and attack this devilish bird. He pushed off from the ground and flew up. The teacher was in the air. He was practically on the same level as the leader. The teacher asked to discard even the thought of approaching the students. After all, he will not allow this to happen, no matter what the cost. He will stand until the last. After all, he is an officer, a teacher, a defender, and this is his duty. The teacher hit the flying leader of the heretics with his spear. He covers himself with wings. The leader fell to the ground noisily. The impact was very powerful because pieces of the road surface flew in different directions. After hitting the ground, he was still alive. The man slowly stood up. He said that this time the teacher made him very angry. At that moment, the teacher flew up to him. He shouted that no one cared about his mood, and he's very annoying. The hands holding the sword were behind the head. The teacher was fully prepared to strike again. The teacher lowered his sword and struck the leader with it. Now the teacher looked at him in surprise. He didn't immediately understand what was happening. The leader caught the blow with his wings, and only a few feathers flew out of them. He laughed and said that after death the teacher can gain a divine body. The teacher looked in surprise at what was happening to the Birdman. The teacher was angry and also confident in their abilities. The teacher sat down for a few seconds to catch his breath. He plunged the sword into the ground. He leaned on his weapon so as not to lose his balance. At the same time, the leader took off all his feathers, and now they looked like a feather scarf. The leader no longer had wings. He looked almost like an ordinary person. The leader swung and threw these feathers with incredible force right at the teacher. These were no longer feathers, but a cloud of fiery energy, like a laser beam. The beam approached the teacher sitting on the ground with lightning speed. The teacher saw this and prepared to take the blow. The teacher was not afraid. He looked the enemy straight in the face. He was ready to take the hit. The teacher rose from the ground and prepared to take the blow. He also gathered all his remaining forces to strike his enemy as well. In response to the leader's actions, the teacher threw a stream of his strength and energy directly at him. It looked like a beam of energy, only it was already light. The teacher bravely took the blow. The blow hit him right in the chest. The teacher gritted his teeth in pain. The clot of energy that the teacher threw reached the leader. She hit him square in the chest and knocked him down. Scarlet blood appeared on the shirt. He was amazed. Perhaps the blow hit him right in the heart. Although whether evil spirits have a heart is a big question, the teacher was able to defeat the leader of the heretics. He succeeded. The man had streams of blood dripping from his mouth. The face turned blue. The leader was slowly losing his vitality. He did not expect such a turn of events. He wanted to be a winner, but it happened as it happened. In this fair fight, good defeated evil. The battle was over. It took place right on the square in front of the school building. All the students saw how desperately their teacher defended them. Evil was defeated. The leader of the heretics slowly sank to the ground. The teacher's body was covered with many lacerations. Blood was flowing out of them. There were bruises on the face. He stood and held his hand over his heart. The teacher repeated once again that whoever attacks his people will undoubtedly be punished. The last blow was very strong, and he took away almost all of the teacher's vitality. The teacher sat down. With one hand he leaned on the sword which was driven into the ground. He was exhausted and wounded, but still tried to keep his balance. At that second the teacher noticed a familiar silhouette. Was it really Yu Shen? The teacher could not believe his eyes. He thought he was already dead and began to hallucinate. Where could a student come from here? The young man was getting closer. Now he was already standing next to his teacher. The teacher did not believe it. It was really his student, and he was standing next to him. Yu Shen knelt down in front of the teacher. He told him about successfully passing the exam, and the fact that he took first place in Mobe, and he still did not know what place he took in the province. The teacher was proud of him. He said that in his eyes the young man was always the best. Yu Shen was indignant, because his teacher was now dying before his eyes. The teacher answered falteringly that death perhaps liberates. The teacher took his lucky amulet out of his pocket. He knew that it was Yu Shen who was now worthy of being its owner. He said that this amulet is his pride. With this amulet, Yu Shen will be able to prove that he is part of the hero's family. After all, the teacher had long considered the young man a member of his family. The young man took the amulet and looked at it. The teacher said that he always protected the young man at school. After all, he was from a criminal city. The teacher extended his hand to the young man's head. His hand was shaking. The teacher was losing strength every second. Yu Shen quickly bent down and the teacher put his hand on his head. He had done this more than once, but at that moment the teacher said goodbye to his student forever. It was a very touching scene. He asked the student to never allow anyone to change him. Always be yourself and do what he thinks is right. Always have your own opinion and listen to your heart. The teacher said that he saw a bright light. And it's time for him to leave. He was very glad that he spent the last seconds of his life with his best student. After all, he was not like everyone else. He was different from everyone else. The teacher repeated the word light again. Yu Shen didn't understand what he was talking about. The young man did not see any light around. The teacher slowly sank to the ground. The teacher sat down on the ground and bowed his head. Next to him, stuck into the ground, stood his sword, which served him faithfully. Yu Shen sat opposite the teacher, kneeling. Yu Shen was in a lot of pain right now. He was not soulless, as he seemed to many. Tears streamed down his face. He had never cried before. At this moment, he recalled the best episodes from his school life that were with the participation of the teacher. I remembered his wise advice. At this moment, he became even stronger. He had rage in his soul against all the evil spirits that had appeared, because they killed his teacher. He shouted that they would all die, and he clutched his blade tightly in his hand. He ran up to the heretics and began to swing his blade wildly. He mercilessly cut the heretics with his blade. Splashes of blood scattered to the side, but the guy could no longer be stopped. It was as if he himself had been possessed by a demon. His gaze was full of anger as never before. He believed that he had the power to take revenge and stop this invasion. He killed the heretics one by one, pierced through bodies. He did it quickly and ruthlessly. The girls who had previously fought with evil spirits, as well as the captain, looked at the young man in surprise. How does this fragile boy have so much anger, so much strength and hatred?